Well, it's good morning. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Before we proceed, I'd like to go over some items for our remote hearing. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to remain visible on camera for the duration of their participation in the hearing, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning on and off your microphone during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that your words are captured on the live stream. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure that all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Now, does any member have a question about the procedures for this hearing? And let me just sort of move to just make sure I'm make yourself audible. I'm not able to see everybody at this moment. Hearing none, we will proceed. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. On May 28th, the Department of Veterans Affairs released its fiscal year 2022 budget request. Notably, this is the first VA budget for Secretary McDonough and the Biden administration. It lays out the budgetary framework for the entire department, including the VA healthcare system, benefits, and memorial programs to provide support and services promised to all those who served our nation, their families, and survivors. First off, Mr. Secretary, please extend my sincerest gratitude to all of VA's dedicated workforce. You all stepped up to serve our veterans during an incredibly tough year. Thank you. VA's budget proposal takes critical steps to properly fund many initiatives and priorities that have long needed more attention. If we're going to build back veterans' trust in VA, we need to start making serious investments in the federal agency meant to serve them. Almost $270 billion, at almost $270 billion, this request represents roughly a 10% increase over the current fiscal year. While the Secretary will describe the budget request in more detail, I would like to emphasize some important policy priorities that were included in the proposal. One of my top priorities this year is to continue our work to reduce veteran suicide. I'm glad to see VA requested $598 million for veteran suicide prevention outreach programs. This is a 92% increase over 2021. VA plans to grow the Veteran Crisis Line by implementing 988 as the universal telephone number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Veterans Crisis Line. VA requested funds to implement the Veterans Compact Act passed by Congress last year, which contains 9 provisions introduced by both Democratic and Republican members that form a holistic approach to improving care and enhancing veterans' mental health and well-being. Critically, this legislation includes my Veterans Access Act, which will provide free stabilization care for veterans experiencing acute mental health emergencies, regardless of whether they are already enrolled in VA healthcare. VA is also dedicating resources to community-based suicide prevention programs through the Staff Sergeant Parker Gordon Fox Suicide Prevention Grant Program, a 3-year, $174 million program that will issue its first grants in late 2022. I'm also pleased to see that VA's budget proposal will help VA better address toxic exposure by supporting the hiring of staff to process claims for new Agent Orange presumptive conditions and managing a growing backlog of claims. This committee remains focused on helping veterans suffering from the health effects of toxic exposure, no matter where or when they served. Last month, I unveiled the Honoring Our Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act of 2021 to recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war and ensure all veterans can utilize VA care and benefits after being exposed to toxic substances during their service. I look forward to working with VA on this important issue. VA's request also takes important steps to ensure that VA is welcoming for all veterans and VA staff who enter its doors. The budget would increase funding by $12.9 million to strengthen VA's diversity, harassment prevention, and equal employment opportunity counseling programs. It would also increase funding to ensure compliance with the Deborah Sampson Act to support women veterans. I'm also glad to see VA requested $2.6 billion to reduce homelessness, a 14.5% increase over the prior year, and significant funds to modernize VA's antiquated IT and medical supply systems. Now, let me return to some areas where I believe Congress should focus its attention as it considers VA's budget request. As a committee, we have to ask if VA's budget makes strategic sense, considering what we have learned from the pandemic. The pandemic upended our lives for the last 15 months and forced VA to reconsider how it operates, even at the most fundamental levels. VA was challenged by, among other things, global supply chain shortages for basic medical items, the need to minimize in-person appointments, and the need to support remote work for thousands of employees. However, VA persevered in its mission during the pandemic due to the dedicated and courageous service of its workforce. VA hospitals and clinics provided health care to veterans, benefits were paid, and burial services continued. VA further adapted by employing telehealth appointments to reach quarantined veterans and established regional readiness centers to fight supply chain challenges, even as VA executed its fourth mission in local communities across the country and expanded its reach to non-veterans. I also just want to add that VA achieved a remarkable feat in minimizing the number of fatalities and infections at its community living centers. And I believe that VA managed CLCs and states that manage their veteran homes need to tell their story, and we need to highlight what went right with the management of those facilities, given the fact that 40% of the nearly 600,000 fatalities in our country were attributed to long-term care facilities. If, as we hope, the current COVID pandemic is ending, we must think ahead to better prepare VA for the next emergency that could disrupt VA operations. We must think strategically about what investments are needed today to improve VA's resiliency and flexibility so that we can adapt to the emergency environment of tomorrow. The second point for consideration is the need for infrastructure improvements. The administration included $18 billion for new VA infrastructure, a much needed boost that I support in order to ensure VA has a modern and efficient healthcare system that works for all veterans. However, the budget must include adequate resources to oversee and successfully manage major construction projects. We cannot repeat the past mistakes that led to delays and cost overruns. We must also continue to invest in VA's human capital to improve services for veterans. For example, the department, especially the Veterans Health Administration, continues to carry too many unfilled positions, sometimes as many as 50,000 vacancies. VA can build new facilities, but if VA does not have the workforce to staff them, then it cannot deliver on its promises to veterans. Complex hiring authorities, non-competitive salaries, lengthy onboarding processes, and other administrative barriers impact VA's ability to meet staffing needs across all occupations. The budget proposes some needed steps to strengthen the workforce, but VA must provide basic rights and protections to its entire workforce. The Secretary has reestablished what is called official time so that union representatives can support employees who file grievances, appeal decisions when they find themselves stuck in a bureaucracy. This is a welcome step. However, collective bargaining rights must be extended to all VA's employees, including those nurses, physicians, and other frontline healthcare workers that fall under the Title 38 statute, as I have proposed in legislation introduced this Congress. Now, finally, we need a department and budget process that is more transparent and accountable. VA's proposal includes some very useful steps, such as an increase in resources for Inspector General oversight. However, in the coming weeks, the committee needs to see more detailed plans for many items in this budget request, as well as how VA plans to spend remaining American Rescue Plan funds. We recently passed bipartisan legislation to require more regular budget updates so that we can better understand how funds have been spent and what the need continues to be. There is no question that as our veteran population changes, VA's mission must adapt. The budget should reflect that. However, Congress and this committee must have the ability to assess these plans with a greater level of detail so that we can better assure veterans and the American public that taxpayer dollars are being directed in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, on our first panel, we will hear from the Secretary and the VA's Chief Financial Officer. On the second panel, we will hear from several veteran service organizations and the American Federation of Government Employees to get their analysis and input on the budget request. I look forward to their testimony. Ranking Member Bost, I now recognize you for 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to welcome Secretary McDonough and all of our witnesses. And any way we can look at it, the VA budget has doubled over the past decade. We have never asked the VA to do more with less. VA's biggest budget increases have come in the last 2 years. The CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan added tens of billions of dollars to the largest regular appropriation VA has ever received. This time, and the time has come to ask when VA will be adequately funded. Congress must always prioritize veterans. Let me say that again. Congress must always prioritize veterans, but there is a natural limit to how big any budget can be. Regardless of our political beliefs, I think we are all concerned about the national debt outgrowing our economy. VA has requested a 10% increase next year. If that rate of growth continues, the VA's budget will be $574 billion by 2030. The problem is the number of veterans using the VA services is not up by 10%. The number of veterans receiving disability compensation or pension benefits is only growing at about a 4.3% growth. The number of veterans receiving VA health care is only up by 1.3%. It is true that those veterans are seeking more care, but the number of outpatient visits is only going up at 3.7%. VA forecasts the number of veterans enrolled in a VA will actually go down. I'm not suggesting cutting VA. Let me say that again. I'm not suggesting cutting VA, but the budget growth has to be more in line with demand. VA has made a lot of progress in expanding access, increasing quality, and improving customer service. The substantial budget increase of the past several years has enabled that. Without a doubt, there is more to be done, but we need to be better understanding of what success looks like and how much achieving these goals will cost. I'm concerned about the VA using one-time dollars from the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan to create permanent expenses. I'm also concerned that the VA budget seems to reduce infrastructure spending only to then plus it up in the American Job Plan. Funding maintenance is important. We should take care of it now through the regular budget process. That's not to mention the elephant in the room, Mr. Secretary, that's toxic exposure. Supporting toxic exposed veterans is one of my priorities. And I know that it is also for you and for the chairman and the Senate and VSOs as well. Several toxic exposure bills have been introduced, including mine, which is the TEAM Act. And the conversation that I had yesterday with the secretary or with the chairman asking me to join on with his bill, which I can't do until we can figure out what the overall costs are and accurate costs are. You know, the preliminary cost estimates of those bills range from as high as $1.5 trillion. For comparison, the president has proposed a $6 trillion budget for the entire federal government. Potential bill costs of this magnitude are unheard of in the VA. They raise serious questions about our ability to pay for this legislation. They also raise questions about VA's ability to implement it and to do so without compromising service for other veterans in other areas. We need a fiscally responsible approach. Mr. Secretary, I've asked you and your staff multiple times, verbally and in writing, to engage with Congress on these issues. We still do not have any in-depth insight from the administration or VA on toxic exposure legislation. I'm asking you again to be our partner in this. This is the single biggest issue we are facing in this committee. Veterans are counting on us to get it right. The administration's absence from this discussion does not help anyone. And I hope we can have a frank discussion today about how to provide care and benefits for toxic exposed veterans without breaking the bank or crippling the department. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you're still muted.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I appreciate that. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate your engagement on the toxic exposure issue. It is also one of my top priorities for this year, and I know that we are going to work productively together on coming together on that issue. Now, I will now recognize our witnesses on the first panel. Representing the Department of Veterans Affairs is Secretary Dennis McDonough, who is accompanied by the Honorable John Rachalski, Assistant Secretary for Management and Chief Financial Officer for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Secretary McDonough, you are now recognized for 10 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of President Biden's fiscal year 2022 budget request and fiscal year 2023 advanced appropriation request for VA, and for your unwavering support of veterans. I'm accompanied by John Richelski, our Assistant Secretary for Management and Chief Financial Officer. Let me also acknowledge the veteran service organizations, including those who will testify on the next panel, that help make us at VA better, and our union partners who make VA stronger. We have some good news in this budget. First, we look forward to returning to pre-pandemic in-person operations at all our facilities. Second, we've taken steps to reduce the backlog of claims caused by the pandemic. We ramped up scanning efforts to digitize federal records for claims processing and temporarily assigned VA employees to the National Personnel Records Center to pull records necessary for claims processing. Now, most of VA's requests for records are answered in 2 to 3 days, and the number of pending VA-related records requests dropped by 90% to a pre-pandemic level. Third, VA rated our 1 millionth veterans disability claim just yesterday, hitting this important milestone faster than all but 1 year in VA history. We accomplished this despite the challenges of COVID and the challenges they placed on VA and on our veterans during the past year. Fourth, VA has now vaccinated 3.2 million people, veterans, family members, caregivers, employees, and members of our other federal agencies. Last, and most importantly, on May 24th, just 2 weeks ago, there were no COVID-related deaths in any VA facility for the first time in 433 days. That is since March 18th, 2020. Just a few months ago, there were 36 COVID-related deaths in a single day. These positive outcomes are a direct result of 2 factors. One, the resources and support that you all invest in us at VA. And 2, the caring, compassionate people who work here. Let me tell you about one of those people. Doreen Summers is a nurse who joined VA in 2007. Within 2 years, she was asked to join the Disaster Emergency Medical Personnel System that deploys volunteers to support emergencies and disasters. Since then, she has been constantly ready to help those who need it when they need it most. She first deployed in 2008 to help open a federal medical station at Louisiana Tech University that housed and cared for more than 120 people displaced by Hurricane Gustav's devastation. In the years since, she served as a member of the on-call senior management team, as a DEMS faculty member, and as a member of several work groups. In 2018, she deployed to Puerto Rico to assist in leading a federal medical station after Hurricane Maria. So it's no surprise that when COVID-19 struck, Doreen volunteered yet again, leading missions at 2 state veteran homes in New Jersey, to a community hospital and community hospital ICU in Honolulu, Hawaii, to another state veteran home in Hilo, Hawaii, and to a 3rd state veteran home in her hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. Just last month, she volunteered for yet another mission at a vaccination clinic in Detroit. It's VA clinicians like Doreen who risked her life throughout the pandemic to take care of veterans who took care of us, that made 0 COVID deaths on May 24th possible. And VA employees like her will be the first to tell you that their life-saving work isn't possible without the resources that they need and you provide. That's why this budget's so important. The FY 2022 budget request will ensure VA can provide care and services for veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors, and to other Americans, such as the 488 non-veterans treated at VA facilities as pandemic-related humanitarian missions. Those include citizens from Arkansas, Arizona, and Texas, among other states. These resources will be put to good use, empowering our department to fulfill the mission that President Biden charged me with when he nominated me to lead the VA, to fight like hell for our vets. This budget ensures we can continue the growth and success of our caregiver support program by fully integrating families and caregivers into the care plans of the veterans they love, continuing to implement Mission Act expansion of our program for comprehensive assistance to all generations of eligible veterans. And this budget supports the training of over 1,900 field-based staff to improve consistency across the country and increase support of all family caregivers. The budget provides needed funding for women veterans at a time when the number of women using VA healthcare has more than tripled since 2001. By funding recruiting and hiring for women's healthcare providers, improved access to reproductive health services, and emergency services. The budget allows us to continue our success in reducing veteran homelessness, building on the good work of the last decade, during which we reduced veteran homelessness by 50%. That's not all. Budget resources will also allow us to fund mental health and suicide prevention initiatives, address major deficits in construction, physical, and information technology infrastructure, continue our electronic health record modernization, address issues of environmental exposures, as the chairman and the ranking member have just raised, and continue to ensure VA is always a place where diversity, equity, and inclusion are valued and sought. In short, this proposed budget allows us to deliver high-quality whole health care and benefits to our veterans at a time when they need it most. And it does so in large part by enabling the heroic work of VA people like Doreen Summers. I commit to using these appropriated resources responsibly, being fully transparent with you, and getting the greatest value out of each and every dollar. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bost, thank you for the opportunity to appear here before you today. I look very much forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll begin I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to say that the fiscal year 2023 advanced appropriations request for the medical community care account is now just over $24 billion. Funding requests for care in the community have grown substantially in recent years due in large part to the expanded access standards and poor actuarial projections. In early 2018, as Congress debated the fate of the Veterans Community Care Program, the Congressional Budget Office had suggested estimated outlays for the program over a 5-year period would be just under $23 billion. That would average less than $5 billion per year. But we're seeing just in 1 year an amount that is greater than $23 billion projected in this budget. What percentage of VA's total care is now being sent out to the community? And how much of that is because physical plant space at facilities is subpar and doesn't reflect the best practices in 21st century healthcare delivery?
It's true that the community care budget is growing. As a general matter, over the course of the last 3 years, upwards of 30 to 31% of our costs have funded care in the community, although that got as high as 39% at the height of the pandemic, where VA funding underwrote a lot of care in the community when private facilities were trying desperately to stay open. I also note and continue my pledge to remain transparent with you on this, that just over the last several months, going back to March, as you and I have discussed, but continuing in April and May, the monthly outlays for care in the community have been at near record highs. March was a record high, April and May near record highs, even as direct care reaches pre-pandemic levels as well. So demand for care is significant. How much of that care in the community is a result of restrictions in the facilities and the physical plants in the dated facilities where, you know, something like 69% of our facilities are older than 50 years. I don't have that precise number. I'd be more than happy to get that one back to you in writing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd be interested to know whether, the constraint on our ability to put out ambulatory care services and centers and CBOX is also part of that problem. But let me just say, I'm pleased to see that VA is requesting a 5% increase in the overall number of full-time employees for the Veterans Health Administration. And I will do all I can to ensure that these positions are funded. However, I remain concerned that VA does not know its true staffing needs, particularly for clinical professions. For the last 5 years, VA has been in the process of developing staffing models, staffing studies, and internal benchmarks for each occupation across the department. And as of October 2020, such analyses have had to be completed for at least 57 categories of occupations across the department. And this process was expected to continue through fiscal year 2023. So, Mr. Secretary, what progress has VA made in fiscal year 2021 on completing the 20 staffing models that were targeted for completion this year?
So this is a big priority of mine, as you and I have discussed, and as I've discussed in previous appearances before your committee. In candor, not as much progress as I had hoped. But as with the earlier commitment on the question of care in the community, I'd be more than happy to come up to you, come up and sit down with you and your staff to talk through precisely where we are in those estimates.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll quickly get in the last question. Also, the Veterans Medical Care and Health Fund has been established to execute the American Rescue Plan. The budget assumes that 29,900 mandatory FTEs would be funded through this account. Are these the FTEs hired during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Did you hear me, Mr. Chairman? I said yes, they are.
Okay, I didn't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Yes, they are. There that's a net increase of roughly 16,000 FTEs, but we're talking about the same thing.
Okay, for some reason I did not hear that. Let me just say, are these FTEs hired? What is the department's plan once this mandatory funding source through the American Rescue Plan is exhausted?
Well, first of all, we continue to assess that those personnel will be needed for the increase in care, the bow wave of care that Dr. Stone has been talking about and which we're currently experiencing, as I've just indicated a minute ago. We'll need those personnel in the near term. We will assess over the course of this year what those requirements will be going forward. We're also continuing a conversation with you, with the Inspector General and others on this question of the hiring, of the vacancies, and of the required staff. So we'll, during the course of this year, assess what's needed once we've managed this bow wave of care.
All right. Well, thank you. Ranking Member Boss, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, the CBO estimates that the comprehensive legislation that we're looking at to expand care and benefits for toxic exposed veterans could cost $1.5 trillion in mandatory money alone. Could a bill with that price tag, first off, receive your support and your assurance that the VA could absorb it without negatively impacting the services, other services to veterans, and why or why not?
Thank you, Mr. Bost. One, I'm really appreciative of the opportunity that we've had to give technical assistance to you all as you're working on these bills. I know that we are actively doing that at the moment. I don't have cost estimates. I try to stay away from getting in fights about CBO versus OMB cost estimates, so I won't start now on that. But I will tell you that we are looking at the implications of the various proposals, legislative proposals on the Hill, what they'll require in terms of our personnel resources. We'll stay in touch with you as we get that, but haven't given you that number yet. I won't give you that number now because we don't yet have it, and I want to give it to you in an accurate way.
The other part of that question, if I could, because if we don't have those numbers, because now then we're going to have to come to you and ask, okay, what offsets would you suggest if we're looking at that high a number? And I know you don't want to get into what the actual number is going to be, but we got to try to figure out how to pay for this and make sure we're not losing other services.
Well, look, I mean, this is why we've begun the approach that we've begun, Mr. Bost, here with a new way of trying to make sure that we are aggressively, actively pursuing all sources of science as it relates to the exposure and their impact. We made some announcements on that week before last. We're in very close consultation with OMB about that, both as it relates to the rulemaking process, which we are initiating, and I want to not get ahead of that, but also then what that would mean for resources. But again, I want to be really clear that under the Administrative Procedures Act, I will not get ahead of that process. I want to let that happen consistent with the requirements of that law so that we can get to a position where we're addressing this issue holistically for our vets.
Do you have any idea when we will get those numbers?
I don't have we're actively working it now, but to be honest with you, I think we've also prioritized getting you TA on the bills. And a lot of times those are some of the same people doing the TA and who would be doing the assessment of cost. And so as we get those, I'll bring them to you.
Okay.
That's my commitment to you. I'm not gonna try to hide from this, Mr. Bost. But I also, under the theory that General Jones used to talk about, which is you want it bad, you get it bad. I want it good here, and I want to give it to you good.
Well, switching back to the budget request in itself, it's based on expenditure or expected surges in demand for healthcare and when the pandemic ends. What is the impact on the budget if the surge does not happen?
Well, the way I'd answer that question, Mr. Bost, is to tell you that we've now seen in March, April, and May significant surge in demand for service is in direct care. That is to say, in VA provided care and in community care. So much so that we're watching very closely what that means for the overall budget number. So while I generally don't answer hypotheticals, I can also tell you that this one is not hypothetical. We're in the midst of a bow wave of care. We're seeing demand for that care in both channels, and we'll be more than happy to talk through those numbers with you.
I'd like to see those numbers so that we can see it, because we're getting mixed information a little bit on that. But
count on that. Count on that.
The last part is just really trying to figure out. So if the VA budget needs look like as a number of veterans are using the system start to decline, then what do we do?
One is that's not what we're witnessing. We're witnessing exactly the opposite. And I'm sure John has some specifics on that if you want to get into that. But two is, I guess as I've indicated to you, Mr. Bost, in our private conversations and here publicly in the committee, I'm going to judge our success on whether we increase access and improve outcomes for vets. So I hope we're not in a position where demand for our services is going down.
Yeah,
we're currently not in that system. We're not in that situation. And I don't anticipate us being in that situation.
Yeah, my hope is that we are able to increase access and do it at the most cost-efficient way that we
Agree with
possibly
that.
can
Agree
for
with
the
that.
sake of our children, grandchildren, and future veterans. So
Agree with that.
my time has expired, and thank you very much for your answers. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boss. I call on Chairwoman Brownlee of our Health Subcommittee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here with us this morning. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that there is a lot of good news in this budget. So there are a lot of questions I would like to ask, but I'm going to stick with women veterans for the moment. And I know that, so you are proposing, significant increases for women's veterans health. So thank you for that, and focusing in on staff shortages within that parameter, equipment within that parameter. So my general question is, so how is this money going to be distributed? One of my sort of bugaboos, if you will, is the VA tends to distribute this money to VISNs, and then VISNs have a lot of authority to spend those resources. So, my question is, how is it going to be distributed, and how are you going to ensure that the money that you're proposing actually does what it's supposed to do?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chairwoman. And I think it's a great question. It's one I've been asking in the field. But first and foremost, the Office of Women's Health Programs oversees the investments that we make on personnel and on equipment with a particular focus on gender-specific care. So in terms of situationally, that's where it happens. The question then is how. We have a series of calculations that we have to make. So let's take, for example, a radiologist and mammography. There's a certain size of facility that would have a number of women vets who get their care with us at that facility, such that the number would not only merit the investment in the machine of a mammogram, but also the personnel to run it with enough hours in a year for them to maintain their certification. And so we have a series of requirements that really are driven by the size of demand in that facility. That determines the number of people we have there and the kind of equipment we have there. Now, this raises a question, right? Which is, let's call it the field of dreams strategy that says, if there is mammography, would more women vets not come? And so we're exploring that question in various facilities. I've talked about that on my travels already. And this is one that I think we should continue to work with you very transparently and very publicly in the committee. But the bottom line is we've seen substantial increase in the numbers of women veterans. We owe it to them to make sure that we have the kinds of care that they would expect.
Very good. And the other thing is, MST coordinators, peer counselors, that sort of thing. You find, in some VA facilities, there's a full-time MST coordinator, and others, it's very much a part-time. It might be 10 or 20% of one's responsibilities. So, part of Deborah Sampson is to say those positions need to be filled and they need to be full-time. That was the intent from the very, very beginning. So I just, I would like to have kind of further discussions with you in terms of how you intend on being transparent. So, at the end of the fiscal year, I can see, how many more personnel, how many, where the MST coordinators are, how those positions have been filled, are there any empty positions, et cetera. So
this is why I'm sorry to interrupt, Chairman, but this is why it's so important to get the plus up in our office of ORMDI, I think is what it's called,
Yeah.
resolution and dispute management, because that will give us the fulcrum on which to make sure that we're meeting the requirements in the Deborah Sampson Act. And so, and that's a really important piece of business for us. The budget the president's proposing allows us to do that.
Terrific. Last question, and I don't have that much more time, but what resources are going into sexual harassment and the absolute ending of sexual harassment?
Well, we have a whole. You referred a minute ago to the focus on, and I know several of you have sent, Republicans and Democrats jointly sent a great letter down on the steps that I've been talking to Ms. Lurie about this as well, about the steps we're taking on care for MST survivors. So set that, and you just referred to that, but let's set that aside for a second. This again gets our ability to use our enforcement mechanisms inside the department to hold us to account on the kind of culture and facility management that has zero tolerance for sexual harassment. So a big piece of this is the plus up, is the consolidation of our efforts in the Office of Resolution Dispute Management, but also the increased funding there to make sure that we are holding people to account. And then it gets to the whole series of questions that I've talked to you now a number of times about, which is our support for the IG, our reliance on him, on the OAWP. I'm hoping this week our assistant secretary will get confirmed in the Senate for that position. It's vitally important that we have her in that job, somebody with experience in developing whistleblower protection programs, and so that our people who feel threatened have a place to go.
Very good. Thank you. I apologize, Mr. Chairman, for exceeding my time, but I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. I now call on the gentlewoman from American Samoa, and I forget, she's ranking member of one of our subcommittees. She's a very senior member. I call on Amata Radawagan for 5 minutes.
Aloha. Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Boss, for holding this hearing today. Thank you to Secretary McDonough, the VSOs, and the rest of the panelists for testifying. Secretary McDonough, VA assured the committee many times over the last year that the department was effectively mitigating the impact of the pandemic by transitioning care to telehealth, which VA has been a long-time leader in, and contacting every veteran who had an appointment or referral that had been canceled to make sure their needs had been met. If that was true, why does this budget submission still assume there's significant pent-up demand for care that will lead to a surge at the end of this calendar year and into the next?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's true because of what we're seeing in general healthcare posture in the United States, which is up to 40% of people forewent of their own, and this is outside the VA system, forewent periodic care, annual checkups, and the like. And so we did overwhelmingly go meet vets where they were, stayed in close touch with them. We really outperformed market targets on getting urgent care addressed in less than a day and a half throughout the system. That's a testament to Doc Stone and the team here. That has nothing to do with me. This is all them. But there is a fact that some people did choose not to go for care. And so we anticipate, and frankly, what we are now witnessing to be true, that people will come back to care in a very aggressive way. And I'm happy about that. And we are now having planned for it and are well resourced for it, in a position to manage it. And we're managing it well.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Radawagan, and talofa to you. I now call on Representative Lamb for 5 minutes.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, did you just call me? I was having a technical issue here.
Yeah, I did call on you, Mr. Lamb. You're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you again for your service up to this point. We've talked a little bit before about the issue of Agent Orange in particular, and it was a great success in the NDA last year to get bladder cancer and the other 3 conditions added to the list. The one that the National Academy of Sciences had also called for was hypertension, and we didn't get that across the line in the NDAA. So I know based on the last couple of years that VA does have some authority on its own to add something like that to the list. Your predecessor often gave us the impression that the main impediment to getting hypertension added was at the Office of Management and Budget. So I wanted to ask you, is there any plan to help get hypertension added to the list? And if so, is it a budgetary objection that's holding it up, or what's the current state of affairs?
Thanks, Mr. Lamb, very much. I was obviously we were very pleased, as you and I have talked privately and we've said publicly, with the 3 presumptives you enacted in NDAA. We were able to announce week before last that the 3 conditions you mentioned, bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, and Parkinsonism, will be presumed to be connected. We're in a position now to implement that. And we're rolling out aggressively on that, including not requiring people who had filed in the past and been denied to refile. We will automatically review those already filed cases. So we're working that. On the question of hypertension, this is something we continue to look at. It is a significant budget outlay. There's no doubt about that, although I have not discussed it with OMB, and I've not discussed the cost with anybody yet. So it's not, I think it is a cost issue as a general matter, but I have not discussed it in any way. So I don't want to leave the impression with you that we're limited necessarily by cost. We haven't crossed that bridge. It is right now a clinical issue. And, so we're looking at it closely, but prevalence of hypertension in men of a certain age is very high across the board. Irrespective of service. And so disaggregating that is a very difficult clinical challenge. We're trying hard to do it, and I'll make sure that we stay in touch with you as we work it.
Thank you for that commitment. And I just encourage anyone from your staff that is looking at this to please review the National Academy of Sciences finding on hypertension, because they did consider this. And for me, it just comes back to the fact that while the cost may be high, the people who are suffering from this today, although there are many, wrote a blank check to our government when they signed up to serve in the armed forces. And so for them, I don't think any cost is too high. And
agreed.
From both this committee and this administration, we're willing to spend money on a lot of things right now. So I appreciate your commitment on that. The other question I had for you, sir, is you, after our first encounter in the committee, were very swift in restoring some of the union rights and protections that had been taken away under the previous administration. I want to thank you for that. And for being so communicative with us on that. The one report I am still getting is that the question of official time for Title 38 employees has been under review since March. And so I just wanted to ask you if you could tell us the status of that and when those employees can expect an answer.
Sure. It's not only under review, it's under active consideration. And we're talking about this, let's say, robustly. And so I hope to have some news for you soon. I think this is obviously a critically important issue. We also are looking at a raft of litigation that goes back to the period of, say, the last 4.5 or 5 years. And so I'm really hoping that we can resolve all these issues so we can get back to restoring labor manager relations.
Thank you very much. I can tell it's a priority. The rank and file are asking about it a lot after the year they've been through, and I just think they deserve to have it at the top of the agenda. So appreciate you keeping there. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. I now recognize gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great to see you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for joining us today. As the strategic review of EHRM, electronic health record modernization, comes to an end, are you examining, Mr. Secretary, any new ways to structure the subsequent go lives, such as the joint implementations with DoD or groups of medical centers simultaneously?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Banks, and thanks for your you and your staff have been really great partners in this for us as we're undertaking the review. We are coming to the end of this period of looking at this closely. We are looking at some structural questions, including how we're structured to oversee this. We are not revisiting the relationship with DoD on this. We do have to have much more candor with one another and then with ourselves, frankly, about what precisely we need, what we require from the Cerner system. We are not changing out from the Cerner system. Let me reiterate that. I said that the last time I was before this committee. I reiterate that now. But frankly, how we train and how we rack up requirements, how we govern and how we manage this process needs some work. Those are internal issues. How we interact with DoD, the timing of that interaction, well, I think will largely stay the same. The timing of go live, for example, at Columbus is still a big open question for us. And I'll make sure that we come see you in the course of the next couple of weeks as we wrap this up.
I appreciate that, sir. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the veteran crisis line.
Sure.
Can you elaborate on the proposal in the budget request to increase the capacity of the VCL? The VCL has been significantly expanded in recent years, including over the last year using COVID relief funds. What further expansions are planned and what is driving those expansions?
Yeah. Thanks very much for that question. What's driving the request for the expansion of funding is massive demand on the VCL. Some of this is related to the pandemic, we assess. Some of this is related to overall demand. Just in the last year, we've seen 1.56 million vets receiving mental health services. The number of vets who come to us through the Veterans Crisis Line in a moment of crisis is expanding substantially. I've spent time myself with some of our supervisors in the VCL. They're reporting massive demand. In some cases, we're talking as much as 80 to 100% increase in demand in and around the pandemic. And so that's the main issue, demand. And we're actually getting quite good at the connection from the VCL into the emergency departments that allow us to make very important handoffs at moment of crisis for our vets, which, by the way, happens to be something that we're all going through in the country, not vets alone, but all of us.
I appreciate your interest and focus on that. You might not know this, but in September 2018, President Trump signed a bill that I introduced that required the department to conduct a study on the crisis line's effectiveness in preventing veteran suicide between January 2016 and January of 2021. And specifically, the legislation required the department to analyze how many veterans contacted that hotline, how many received follow-up services after their initial call, and how many of these veterans sadly ended up taking their own lives. When do you think that any of us might see the results of that report? Are you familiar with that report that was requested, and when can we see it?
I'm embarrassed to admit, Mr. Banks, that I'm not, and I'm more embarrassed to admit that it's not up there yet because it's now June, so it was due 5 months ago. I'll take this and I'll be in touch with you this week on it.
I appreciate that very much. Thanks for all that you do, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Let me just review who's next. I believe it is Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, my colleague from California and chairman of our subcommittee on economic opportunity. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary McDonough, it's always great to see you. Thank you for all your great work for our veterans. And I so appreciate that you have made ending veteran homelessness a top priority and that you're working collaboratively with HUD and Secretary Fudge to make that a reality. I was really glad to see that the budget request included $89 million in fiscal year 22 to implement some of the homelessness provisions that I champion, that many of my colleagues here championed, that were signed into law as part of the Isaacson-Roe Act in January. However, I was concerned to see that the grant and per diem program request would maintain rather than increase the current level of 12,700 transitional housing beds. So my question, Mr. Secretary, is how is VA preparing for the anticipated influx of at-risk and homeless veterans entering the system as federal, state, and local COVID eviction and foreclosure moratoriums expire?
Yeah, it's good. Thank you, Mr. Levin. It's good. Good question. We're intensifying our focus on prevention. We're obviously spending a lot of time. We've been meeting not only inside the department, but across the government on an interagency level on these questions. We'll be doing so again later this week to make sure that we're in a position to stay in touch with those personnel at greatest risk. We've proven concept quite well over the course of these last 10 years, not only in reducing by 50% the number of homeless, but it's upwards of 850,000 veterans and family members who have been kept in housing because they're approaching a moment of crisis. And so we're focusing very much on those efforts in terms of prevention. And then on the larger questions around grant and per diem, I'm happy to take those and come back to you with any more specifics on that.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. Related to that, as part of the Isaacson-Roe Act, HR 7105 that we passed in January, the budget request doesn't appear to reference the provisions related to the Mulder Act. And that's something that I worked on with Jody Arrington, my friend from Texas. And that basically is to improve the transition assistance program. It includes an off-base transition training pilot and a grant program for organizations that provide coordinated transition assistance. So you may have to take this back as well. It may just be a matter of updating those items. But obviously, we hope that the budget request will fund these programs and that it also will provide more detail on the cost to implement them.
Yeah, count on that. I just had a meeting last week on all the provisions from that act, and I remember seeing those in there. So I just have to harmonize that brief, your recollection, and the budget, and I'll make sure, because we got a lot of work going in on the TAP programming. So I'll make sure that we get to you this week as we have in the past on issues that you raised.
Appreciate it very much, Mr. Secretary. And as I mentioned to some of your team, our hope in this legislation was that it would be implemented, at least the pilot would roll out during, sort of our response to the pandemic and obviously the unique needs that are existing as a result. I also noticed that the Office of Transition and Economic Development did not request any new FTEs despite the expansion of TAP resources and the office's recent absorption of other VA programs. So the question is, how is the office planning to provide high quality services without any new FTEs and the new programs that are being laid out?
I think it's a very fair question, and I think let me take it and come back to you with a good answer. I don't have one off the top of my head, but I am happy to see that we are increasing efficiency in important spaces. So unless, John, you have something specific on this, okay, we'll come back to you on it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate so much all that you and your team are doing, and particularly now with the response to the pandemic, this is no time to be nickeling and diming our VA or our veterans. We have to be there, as Mr. Lamb said, we have to be there with all the resources you need to serve our veterans well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back and I'll thank the Secretary again and welcome him to San Diego to come visit anytime.
Thank you. A lot of vets in San Diego, so we'll be out there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. I now recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Takano, and thank you, Secretary McDonough, for joining us. Appreciate you being in Kansas a few weeks ago and meeting you at our VA facility in Emporia, and also very much enjoyed our phone call a few weeks ago as well. So a couple questions. First off, on the War Stopper program, as you know, that's a priority for me. I just think it's a big opportunity to streamline cost and deliver a better supply chain for the VA. What's the state of our negotiations with the VA and DoD about VA's full participation in the War Stopper program?
Yeah, so you and I have talked about this. I owe you some answers on it. I think, John, do you have an update on where our negotiations are on that?
We're negotiating, but I think the issue is there's an executive order associated with this.
Oh, I can't quite. If you could speak up a little bit, sir. Oh.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Just very faintly.
Mr.
Oh,
Secretary, we
that's
seem to
better.
have a little bit of a sound issue, and Mr. Mann, we'll arrest the clock here so that you're.
Apparently, we're sharing a microphone here.
Okay.
So we're
That's much better.
Yeah. All right. So we are working with DoD, but I think the larger issue there's an executive order related to this, and so we're also involved with an interdepartmental initiative that's working to provide recommendations to the administration by July 20th. And so all of these are sort of coming together. And so I think in the next month you'll see a lot of recommendations coming out associated with this, and then a projection going forward of how to interact with DoD, DHS, HHS, VA, all of those. It'll be a more comprehensive, I think, look across the government. But it's active.
My understanding is that there's maybe a list that the VA needs to generate to provide to the DoD on what's actually needed, and the ball's in the VA's court to provide that list. Is that right? And if so,
it
can
is.
we get that done ASAP?
Yeah, it is. And there's no holdup. I think the issue is that we are working with this sort of cross-government initiative and the administration, so that we do it, I think, more thoughtfully and I think more thoroughly. So that is going on, and that list will come out.
Okay. Any commitment on when we would? I'm just trying to get some traction here.
Yep. The recommendations are supposed to be to the president by July 20th.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And then question for Secretary McDonough, specific to the budget. There's a budget request, that include $26.5 million for the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, or OAWP.
Yeah.
I know we talked about this before. This is a $3.8 million increase to add 27 positions. However, in the past, the AOWP's director has testified on our subcommittee that roughly half of their disciplinary recommendations had been rejected. And so I'm just trying to figure out why increase this program by this amount of money and add 27 more when what we're currently doing doesn't seem to be working as effectively as it should be.
Yeah, it's a very, very fair and highly logical question. So just one thing back on the other piece of business, Mr. Mann.
Yep.
John and I and whoever else is appropriate would be happy to come sit with you about what our recommendations are to that process, either before or right after the 20th, after we submit our recommendations to the president. On OAWP,
Thank you.
On OAWP, it's really it's a very challenging question, because here's what happens. The OAWP does an investigation. They come up with recommendations. They pass those recommendations to who we call the responsible management official. That responsible management official can choose to take some or all of those recommendations, or none. And if they take none of those recommendations, I am required to report to you all about what happened there. Why did the responsible management official not implement the recommended fixes from OAWP? I think it's obvious to me two things. One is, I hear from that office, which has not yet been fully staffed since you all enacted it several years ago, that it needs more people. I take their word for that. But we also have a governance and management issue, which is we have to figure out why there's such a disconnect, and this is on me, between the investigators in OAWP and the responsible management officials. And why is it that either the recommendations aren't what the management official thinks that needed to happen, or the management officials are ignoring the recommendations. We just have to increase that oversight, and that's something that's on me and my general counsel. We're actively working this. This is one of the issues we'll address as soon as Mary Ann Donahue is in the job, which is, I hope is later this week if she gets through the Senate. And I think your question is highly logical. It's something that is it's an aggravation to me because this is obviously required in this department. And we have to get down to it. And I hope that the next time I appear before you, you don't have to ask about it because we've addressed it.
Yeah, well, thank you, sir. We appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. I now call upon the chairman of our subcommittee on oversight investigations, Chairman Pappas, the gentleman from New Hampshire, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Takano and Mr. Secretary. Appreciate your comments. And just picking up on that last issue with OAWP, obviously our O&I subcommittee continues to be very interested in this. We have a few legislative opportunities on the table, and we're really looking forward to seeing the new individual in this position and working with you to ensure better management of that office. It's been a missed opportunity over the last few years, not to have things up to speed there, especially for those individuals who come forward with valuable information about how to improve things at VA. So that is so important. I appreciate your commitment there. Now, I want to ask, in addition, about diversity, equity, and inclusion within VA's workforce. I know there have been countless examples about VA employees who experience racism and other discrimination at VA facilities. And too often, an employee feels helpless in their appeals to management if they report an experience at all. So earlier this year, I joined with Chairman Takano in a letter to you, noting some successful initiatives at VA. And I think it's encouraging to see in the proposed budget an additional $12.9 million to be put to good use here. It would allow the hiring of 74 additional full-time equivalent equal employment opportunity counselors. And I want to know what other efforts this budget increase will potentially allow, and will the office conduct additional site visits at VA to help root out discriminatory policies and practices as sort of part of the action plan moving forward?
Yeah, thank you very much for this, and I appreciate our ongoing conversation about this whole range of issues of oversight and accountability. We've talked a couple of times here this morning about the importance of that nearly $13 million and what that will do in terms of giving us a fulcrum on which to really leverage accountability and oversight. I also think, I think you're aware, but maybe not, about a task force that I've stood up on IDE, we call it DEIA, to focus very much on access as well. They're about halfway through their work. I anticipate seeing a whole range of recommendations from them, some of which will require funding, but some of which will not. So we'll stay in close touch with you on that. And then I think the most important thing is, an additionally important thing is making sure that the team that I'm bringing in with me reflects the diversity of this workforce, which reflects the diversity of our veterans. And so I think you've seen that so far. I think you will continue to see that among our senior leaders within the department. And then the question is, once people are in those chairs, are we following through on the request for clarity, request for information, and the outreach that we are getting? And you're absolutely right that the numbers of incidences of our staff members and others reporting questions around race and racism are just simply too high. And I'm committed to reducing that, and I'll stay very close with you on that as we do so.
Well, thank you. We look forward to seeing those recommendations and tracking the implementation of those as well. Turning to a different issue, when it comes to oversight. I think there's great interest on our committee on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we're taking a look at the supplemental funding that's been provided for VA during the pandemic. And I think there's broad agreement that this funding is being used in an important way to help our veterans. But at the same time, I think Congress has got to ensure accountability over this increased level of funding. So we have legislation that has passed the House on this. We're waiting for Senate action. But I think much of the bill really simply requires more specificity from the department on spending plans. So I'm wondering if in advance of the legislation being adopted by the Senate, we might be able to work together to get this information for our committee. Maybe this is more of a question for Mr. Rochalski, but I appreciate any response you have.
Yeah, well, he can answer the question too. If he answers it wrong, then I'll correct him. But he should be up there with you as much as you want. I've said this to Mr. Bost on a telephone call. I've said this to the chairman. It is in our interest for you to understand precisely what we're doing with the resources that you've enacted. I know that John feels the same way, and so I think it's good if you guys want to pass a law to do that. But even if you don't, we're going to do this. And so you tell us what you need. We'll answer the questions. We may not always be right on time. I know Mr. Bost is not happy with our timing on us getting the toxic exposure cost estimates and resource estimates up to you. But we will get you those. And if you need them, we'll get you them. You deserve that. We owe you that. We'll do it.
Well, thank you for that commitment. We'll certainly take you up on that. And my time's up, so I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Secretary McDonough. Kind of following up on resources, I'm very supportive of the digital GI Bill project to modernize the systems that adjudicate these GI Bill claims. In the Omnibus Appropriation Act last year, Congress authorized $243 million to be transferred from the CARES Act to cover the expenses for the first 2 years of this effort. I understand that only part of this funding has actually been transferred. Why does the budget request an additional $81.5 million when the current funds have yet to be transferred?
So that's a good question. I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to promise to get back to you on it because I don't know. But I don't know if, John, you have any specifics on this?
I do not. I have to check on the transfer.
So John said, John said that he's going to check on it. He doesn't have any specifics on it either. So we owe you that, sir, and we'll get that to you. It's a highly logical, reasonable question. We'll get you a good answer.
Thank you. Thanks, sir. I appreciate it. Let me do an additional question. And can you tell me a little bit more about the $3.6 million requested to fund the VA Disability Employment Pilot Project and how this project will differ from the services provided by the Veteran Readiness and Employment Program?
I don't have enough details in front of me, and it looks like John does not either, but I'd be happy to come up to you with specifics on that too.
Okay, thank you.
This is a joint program with the Department of Labor, so I think that's the innovation here, and how it distinguishes from existing programming. I don't have that information in front of me, so I owe you that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And also, Mr. Secretary, we're opening in my district. I have Fort Rucker and Maxwell Gunner in Southeast Alabama, and we're opening a new Veterans Retirement Center, and I'm going to be cutting ribbon in a few months. I'd love to extend an invitation to your team.
Great. I'd be honored to join. So if it works, I'll be there.
All right, thanks, sir. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thank you, the gentleman from Alabama. I now recognize the chairwoman of our DAMA subcommittee, Chairwoman Elaine Luria, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. I wanted to personally thank you again for taking a full day to come visit our Hampton VA and learn about some of the challenges for our veterans here in Hampton Roads. And I think it was a very meaningful visit, and we had a great dialogue. I wanted to follow up on one of the topics specific to the subcommittee that I chair about the budget request that we're discussing today. So the budget asks for 334 full-time equivalents to address Agent Orange claims. but a large percentage of the current claims backlog is due to the CMP exams. We're told at least 60%. Does the VA budget proposal account for the potential surge in exam requests from toxic exposure claims, whether from the 3 new Agent Orange presumptive conditions or for potential changes in the law when we look to increase access to benefits for toxic exposed veterans?
So to just take those in reverse order, the budget does not account for potential changes in the law. This goes back to the question I think Mr. Bost is reasonably asking, which is what do we assess this will require in terms of people and time? So it does not include that. The budget does anticipate our ability to support the processing of disability compensation claims for the 3 new conditions. We think that will be about $40 million, as I think you're suggesting. The fact is that we do need to get faster, in my view, about bringing down the backlog, which goes back to the fact that we turned off all CMP exams early in the pandemic. We're actually making decent progress on that, and we're looking for different ways to increase, as you and I discussed privately, ways to increase the slope of that curve, bringing it down. So we're looking at a variety of things, but the budget itself invests in the plan that you and I discussed, which is to get this down below 90,000 at the end of next fiscal year.
Well, thank you. And you mentioned needing to reduce the backlog. Are you requesting any additional resources specifically for that? And on that note, the budget focuses on contract exam support, but many of these claims are very complex. And so does the VA have any plans to increase the level of support from the VHA examiners as it relates to specialty exams and or for increasing capacity?
Yep. So we also, as we discussed when I was down in Hampton, I think thanks to interagency coordination here, VHA has increased the number of CMP exams that it's doing in the facilities. We are also cranking up, and the budget anticipates cranking up the use of contractors. I know that that's not first best in a lot of our vets' minds, but we're trying to bring this down as quickly as we can. And so it's a long way of saying the answer to your question is yes and yes. We are trying to reduce the backlog. We're making good progress, but let's be clear, later this summer, a lot of the Blue Water Navy claims in August will bump into backlog status. We're working through those aggressively. So that number will come back up. That's all in the planning, and we anticipate that. All of it is, we're driving hard to reducing it. And I'll just say one last thing. Because of the attention many of you on the committee, Mr. Lamb and others, have put on this question of the National Personnel Records Center, and because of the funding that you've gotten us in the American Rescue Plan, our investment in digitizing those records at the moment is a great help to NPRC and through them to our vets. But it's also a great help to us, not only now, but in the out years when that is, in all cases, a anticipatory reduction in likely backlog challenges then. So we are making a bunch of investments now related to the American Rescue Plan, related to CARES Act, and we anticipate continuing those in the budget for this year because it's just not acceptable that we have over 200,000 of our vets waiting.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I'm glad to know that we're on the same page, as I'm sure all of my colleagues on the committee are, that we need to get down this backlog, and we want to work with you for any resources through this budgeting process that will help do that, including the NPRC, and I'm glad to work with Mr. Lamb on helping on that issue through the American Rescue Plan and the CARES Act, and I'm sure our conversations will continue, and thank you for your prioritization of helping our veterans. And
Thank you so much. I might just say that, Mr. Bost was out in St. Louis 2 weeks ago. Our team, as I said to him privately, our team was really grateful that he was there. He raised a bunch of these questions too. So you all as a committee have really, I think appropriately, kept the pressure on us. I appreciate it. but also showed us the support that we need and the resources that we need at critical moments. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair Luria. And I also want to add, I appreciate the initiative that Ranking Member Boss took in visiting the St. Louis facility. And I'm hopeful that we're going to solve this issue. I will now want to recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn, for 5 minutes.
Chairman Takano, thank you very much. Ranking Member Boss, as always, thank you for your leadership in this committee. Secretary McDonough, I have 54,000 veterans in my district. Nationally, as I'm sure you're very aware of, there are 581,000 veterans who are currently unemployed last year, as of last year's statistics. I read your testimony, and to be quite frank, I was slightly disappointed. Something I hear oftentimes when I'm out in my district is, why are we giving so much foreign aid to other countries when we have our own veterans on the sides of the streets, or something very similar to this. I'm sure many of you have heard this. So as I was reading through your report and your testimony, I saw that there was very little depth about the economic opportunity for our veterans. A point that I saw that you really harped on was that we're going to start allocating money to create some clean energy jobs at the VA. Yeah, I'm a big fan of solar. I'm a big fan of a lot of energy diversification. And so I thought this was a great idea. But when I saw that there were only $5 million allocated for this, it seemed more like virtue signaling than actually trying to solve the issue. Could you elaborate on this initiative and maybe go in more depth to help me understand, sir?
Thanks very much. Among other things that are in the testimony and that we're working on is a $386 million plan, including the American Rescue, included in the American Rescue Plan, that we call the Veterans Rapid Reskilling and Employment Program, the VRAP. We've hit the street on that in the course of the last 6 weeks. The important innovation here is numerous, which include the fact that working with the Department of Labor, we've prioritized high demand, high wage growth jobs as the priority for training. Any veteran, we have now over 4,000 participants in the program, who's unemployed as a result of the pandemic, can apply. Interestingly, that investment includes not just money for the training itself, but also a stipend for those unemployed vets who are working through getting these skills for these high demand jobs. And then importantly, I think a really good innovation that Congress put in the American Rescue Plan for the VRAP is to say training providers will get fully paid once the vet is employed. So this is a pay for performance kind of effort. I'd love to make sure that any of the vets in your unemployed vets in your district are aware of this particular program and other programming in the department, because I think that there's a lot of good lessons learned here, a lot of important resources that you all have dedicated to it, and the president's budget for next year continues it.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your answer on this. I know that as being the Secretary of the VA, you are passionate about making sure our veterans are taken care of as well, just as I am. I believe every other member of this committee is. So I hope that we can have some beneficial movement towards getting these 581,000 veterans to an employed status. But Ranking Member Boss and Chairman Takano, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative Cawthorn. I now will recognize the gentleman from Indiana and chair of our Technology Modernization Subcommittee, Mr. Mervan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today, and always have an open invitation to come to Northwest Indiana at your earliest convenience. My question is, given the recent cyber attacks and ransomware, especially those perpetrated by foreign actors or groups with foreign ties, securing government assets is more important than ever. However, despite recent events, VA's cybersecurity spending continues to decline in both real dollars and as a percentage of discretionary funds between fiscal year 2021 and FY 2022. Does VA take cybersecurity seriously? Why was there a reduction in cybersecurity spending?
Thanks very much. Let me have John say something about the overall spending levels, because that doesn't sound right to me, Mr. Chairman. But second, let me just say that I've obviously spent a lot of time. I consider this a responsibility of mine, the network security here. I think it's really important, as you and I have discussed, that I send that signal through the agency. And so I've spent a lot of time with our OI&T team. That's our infrastructure and technology team. And I've also spent a lot of time with our chief information security officer on these questions, including just in the course of the last week with this latest news. So it is absolutely a priority. It's a priority of mine. It's a priority of the departments. We recognize that veterans are relying on us to protect their personal information. And we're making sure that we're making the investments and dedicating the time to make sure that that happens. But I don't know, John, do you have a reaction to these overall numbers? Because it just doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir.
So I think that I think we actually have been making increasing investments in cybersecurity, and maybe what I would say is I could provide you a breakout of that. In the time that I've been here, the IT budget has grown. I think in the range of 10 to 13%. A fair amount of that has gone to cybersecurity, and so let me provide the numbers to you, sort of see where we are with it.
Okay. And my next question would be, how much do you anticipate will have gone to cybersecurity, including all supplemental funding for fiscal year 2021?
Could I include that when I provide the numbers to you? I'll include that.
Okay. And then one of my follow-ups is when can we expect to receive a report from the strategic review regarding this?
Regarding cybersecurity for the strategic review for electronic health record modernization?
Yes.
Yeah. One, if you want one now, I'd be happy to send a team up there or come up there myself. One. Two is we'll wrap at least this initial phase of the review up. Let's call it the diagnosis in the course of the next couple of weeks, and so we'll get your report then. But look, if you want an update now, I'd be more than happy to give it. I know you've had a couple times with Carolyn, who's running the review, and you and I have discussed it. But if there's anything in particular you want to follow up now, let us know. We'll get up there. But we'll get your review sometime, a report sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you. My next question would be for among the 19 major agency departments, VA ranks 5th lowest in cybersecurity funding, despite being 2nd largest department and the large amount of personal health information PHI it holds. How can you explain this disparity?
So I think we should take that and have that discussion. I'm just not sure what the information is that you're using, one, but two is, I got to tell you, I spent a lot of time with our people on PII and on threats. And we take this from a kind of a asset value perspective. And we've got a lot of very valuable assets in this department that we spend a lot of time looking at and defending. I don't have I'm not sure that we're operating off the same numbers. So let's have that conversation. But I'll tell you what my philosophy is we have to know what our high value targets are. We have to build defense around those high value targets, and we have to be iterating to make sure that our defense is keeping up with the threat. And so we're spending a lot of time on that. I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm not certain that we're operating from the same data in terms of the metrics on investment, but I'd love to have that conversation.
And Mr. Secretary, I'd welcome that conversation also in the near future. And with that, Chairman, I yield back my time.
Good.
Thank you, Representative Mervan. I now recognize Dr. Nels for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Secretary McDonough and Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Boss. Thank you, each and every one of you and everyone else on this committee for what we do for our veterans. We've had a lot of conversation, and I know you're getting hit with a lot of questions, but what we do know is there's a significant increase in the budget. We know that's requiring more personnel. I just feel that, we grow government. We seem to grow government, and government's response to everything is just throw money at it, and it will improve the position. It has to be about efficiency too. So making sure that the money that is being spent we're going to support this, that we have to see a more efficient VA as well. I see that the National Cemetery Association, it's a $394 million, 42 million more than last year, a 12% increase. And I believe that's for O&M. We got money left over from the CARES Act funds, but what are we going to make sure to make sure that our veterans are interred in a timely manner? I think last time I was on a Zoom with you, my good friend, I had a friend that was, he couldn't get into the National Cemetery here in Houston because of a backlog and delay. But do you have any response to that?
Sure. A couple things. One is on the budget request increase this year for NCA. It really is to the long pole in that tent is to expand our cemetery footprint across the country. This is a multi-year strategy started in the last administration. I'm eager to and proud to support that. It's the biggest expansion in our cemetery capability and infrastructure in a couple of generations. And so we're seeing that manifest in a lot of different places. I'm really proud of it. So that's what that increase, the 12% increase really goes to fund. That's point one. Point two is on the backlog, we did, yeah, I was horrified to hear the story about your friend in Houston. I'd asked our team to follow up with you and your staff. My one bit of request from everybody on the committee is, as you hear from people in your districts who are having trouble because of backlog, please ask them to contact us directly. What we're finding is people are contacting NPRC, which is not us. They have a significant backlog in request, almost 500,000, although that probably includes a lot of double counting. We're helping them with that. We're bringing that down substantially with our people because they need it, and it's also in our interest. It's in our vets' interest. But if you contact us directly, we will make sure that we get those requests filled, as I said in my opening comments, in not more than 3 days. And so we'll be in a position to help much more aggressively if they contact us directly rather than if they go, to the NPRC. So any questions on documentation for benefits, documentation for burial, please contact us directly. And I think we'll be in a position to resolve this pretty quickly.
Thank you, sir. I know earlier Representative Banks asked about the Veterans Crisis Line, and yes. I'm passionate about it, as we all are. We see way too many suicides today of our veterans, and I know that we've asked for like a $600 million investment into suicide prevention in this budget. And what impact do you feel that will have on the veteran suicide rate? I know that Representative Banks put some information out there that he requested, information back from the VA to make sure that if we're going to increase spending, that we see a good return, I guess I should say, on that investment. How do you feel that's going to work with this increase, this $600 million?
Yeah, thanks. So I share your passion for this. Absolutely. One veteran suicide is too many. Our belief here is that suicide is preventable. It requires a whole health focus, and that all of us have to do our part. That's basically our strategy. That's not a strategy I came up with. This is from the last administration in 2018. I think it's very sound. And our latest data suggests that suicide rates fell among veterans with recent VA healthcare in our most recent set of data. So that suggests that the strategy that we're implementing is a sound one, in as much as this increase in funding is based on that strategy, which is based on experience, nonpartisan. I believe that this increase in funding will continue the reduction that we're seeing. The big challenge for us is to make sure that we're also reaching veterans not in our care. You've given us new authorities to do that. We'll make sure that we do that, and we'll do that effectively and make sure we're reporting to you on that.
Without a doubt. And I want to thank you for your answer, and I support that investment to make sure that we go out there and try to help every single veteran that is suffering today. My last question is really geared more towards the personnel, and I know that we're hiring a significant, or you're asking for a significant increase in full-time personnel in the VHA, 28,000 and change or so for 2022. But, last year, I believe the VA added 14,000 full-time equivalent employees. And my question is how many of those positions have been filled?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think as with a couple of the questions that the chairman asked, I think I owe you guys a more robust look at this, and I will fulfill that. In terms of vacancies, I'll just say a couple of things real quick. One is our turnover rate, especially in VHA, at between up to 9%, is well below industry average, which is to say that we keep our people longer and better, even though oftentimes our salaries aren't as competitive as they might be in the private industry. That's because our mission is unbelievable. That's because you all are constantly investing in our people, allowing us to do innovative research, develop innovative partnerships. All of that helps, but we also owe you all, and I think, frankly, after a discussion I had recently with the IG, I think we owe ourselves more kind of a sharper pencil on vacancies, filling positions, and so forth. I've spent a lot of time with our team in the last week on this, and so I owe you that, and I'll come to you with it as I promised the chairman I would as well.
No worries. Thank you. I know my time is up, but I will say that I know that many of those positions are going to be professional doctors, nurses, and stuff, but boy, oh boy, it sure be nice to see a lot of our veterans receive some of those positions, because I think you put a veteran in the VA, he's going to have that passion and that love to help his brother and sister. So anyway, God bless. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Representative Nels. I apologize. I misattributed the title of doctor to you, but I note that you were a former sheriff. So we thank you also for your military service. I now call upon the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, also a veteran, Representative Gregorio Sablan, for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Boss, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Secretary, for joining us. And thank you as well for the meeting with me last week and for your commitment to work with me and the committee to improve services for veterans in the Northern Mariana Islands. One long-standing goal is to provide a community-based outpatient clinic, a CBOC, in the Marianas. We are the only state or territory without a CBOC. And I see from the budget that you are proposing a 10% increase in your department's budget for fiscal year 2022. So throughout your testimony, you discussed modernizing facilities as well. Will you, Mr. Secretary, make a Mariana CBOC part of your fiscal 2022 modernization?
Mr. Sablan, I'm really glad to see you twice in a week, and I want you to know I did volunteer for with VHA if they need anybody when we're doing vaccination efforts out in the islands. I said I could help. I used you as a recommendation, so I don't know if that helps or hurts. I can't make a specific commitment on this, but I can, as I did on the phone, underscore to you that this is a priority, particularly in the region, and particularly given our focus on our vets in the region. So I've seen our efforts on vaccination to be a test of our capability. And so while I can't commit to a specific CBOC in the Northern Marianas, I can commit to you to continue to work on it and to figure out if we can get this done, because I think you're right. It's our vets deserve the kind of care that should come with a presence like that.
Yeah, I'm more so, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, is the Veterans Administration website says that the contract physician is full-time, but in fact, the physician is only part-time. I spoke yesterday to two retired colonels, one who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and they both agree with me that our fee-based, the VA's fee-based doctor here is part-time, and they twice a week, and then half day on a Saturdays, another doctor comes in and fills in for But Dr. Robinson, the VA specific director, made a commitment to me last year to hire a full-time doctor and additionally to hire a mental health provider. Is this still your staffing plans? And when can veterans in my district in the Marianas expect to have a full-time physician and a mental health provider?
It is still our plan, and I'll follow up with you specifically on timing. But I don't have any new news for you on timing right now.
All right, thank you. Chairman Takano, you back. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Oh, before I forget, Mr. Secretary, you're always invited to visit the Northern Marianas. Yeah, there are areas that look just like that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sablon. I now call on the gentleman from the state of Montana and also the ranking member of our Technology Modernization Committee, a committee in which I also serve on. I now call on Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Is my audio working okay?
Mr. Rosendale, it is working. It's a little bit spotty, but go ahead.
Very good. I'll move up here a little closer. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Boss, for putting this all together. I really appreciate you doing that. And Secretary McDonough, it's great to see you again.
Nice to see you too, sir.
I have to tell you, though, I am alarmed by the repeated assertion in the budget submission that the VA seeks to achieve, quote, the right balance, end quote, between care provided in VA medical facilities and from VA's partners in the community. Community care is VA care. And I think that everyone on this meeting is focused on making sure that we can deliver the best health care possible to our veterans when they need it, but also where they need it. Community care supplements the care provided in VA medical facilities. It does not replace or compete with it. More importantly, the Mission Act establishes specific eligibility criteria that, if met, allows veterans to choose whether to seek care in the community. In other words, determining the right balance for the veterans, it's for them to decide and not for the VA to try and direct them to it. Do you intend to use any funds provided to VA to alter the community care access standards in any way?
Mr. Rosendale, it was really good to see you, and I appreciate the question. I guess, so a couple things. One is the statute, the Mission Act, requires us to have best outcomes for the vets determine that question in addition to their eligibility by distance or time. Two is that we are seeing a big demand for care in the community. As I said, record month in March, not quite record, but still substantial investment in the community in April and May. And so these investments, in fact, are happening. My view in wanting to make sure that it is right balanced flows from my idea that the statute says that we should really be focused on outcomes for the vets. And so I tend to believe that we should be making an argument to vets that we provide best care, most culturally competent care, best specialties and expertise. And we should also be making an argument by ensuring that wait times are not long and that we ensure that we keep vets in our care because I believe that they do better in our care. So last point, the statute also requires us to review the access standards at 3 years. We're just at 2 years now. So you have my commitment that I'm not going to change those access standards, but the statute does require us to look at it next year at this time. I will tell you that I'd have asked to make sure that I understand what's happening with care in the community and care in our direct system, that, I just get a good handle on that. And so I am asking those questions, getting my hands around those questions, as I think you would expect me to do, irrespective of where we're getting the care for our vets. And I'd love to continue that conversation with you.
Good deal. So on the your recent trip to Fort Harrison, right there in Helena, we had a great conversation with the staff and the employees, but also we had in that roundtable other healthcare providers that were located around the state of Montana. And when we start looking at a state with less or just over 1 million residents, of which 100,000 of them are veterans, but it's being spread out over 147,000 square miles. I think it's unrealistic for us to believe or try to budget to be building veterans facilities in all of these communities, if you will. But we absolutely, and I know that you agree with this, we want to make sure that our veterans in the rural areas have access to the same high quality health care as those in our urban colleagues. So my question would be, why is it then that when we look at the budget, we see a decrease in the community care spending from 22 to 23 of almost 8%, when the rest of the budget, we continue to see a 10 to 12% increase in spending?
Yeah, so in terms of the advance appropriation, we're kind of making our best assessments based on our engagements with our actuaries. We think that this model has served us well over time. We stay really close with you and your staffs to make sure that you're understanding the assumptions that go into that. But I'll make sure that we stay close to you on this, Mr. Rosendale. I got to tell you, I raise it partially because I'm surprised at the rate that we're seeing. Although I was warned, I warned you, we warned each other that we're going to see a surge in care as we come out of the pandemic, God willing. We are seeing a surge of demand for care in the community. We're seeing a surge of demand for care in the direct care system. And so we'll make sure that we're staying close on that. But again, at the end of the day, we're not trying to signal a direction that we're trying to push vets in advanced appropriation. We're trying to show you what our actuary is warning us to anticipate. And that's why we wanted to put that in the advanced appropriation. But John, do you want to add anything to this, or have I screwed this up?
You may have noticed that we have what we call the second bite, and so we'll make an adjustment to community care going into 23 with that second bite. You may have noticed this year, sir, that the second bite, the $3.3 billion, was exclusively to community care. So we have an opportunity to adjust that. To the Secretary's point, it's our best estimate, but we'll definitely be adjusting it.
Okay, but you can see where someone from the outside look at that would feel like that we are trying to direct. Okay, Mr. Chair, I see the time is over.
Yep.
Thank you.
I just say, I'm sorry, Chairman, I hate that. What I just say is my commitment to you guys is on anything. We're not going to try to sneak one through customs on you here. If we're doing something, I'm going to tell you. And if you see us doing something that you think we're doing, just ask me and I'll tell you. And so, Mr. Rosendale, it doesn't mean we're not going to disagree, but you're not going to have to kind of ferret out what we're up to. I've got a kind of no surprises rule here. I've committed to the chairman and the ranking member on that. I commit to you on that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Mr. Rosendale. And I want you to know that I'm very concerned and committed to the issue of access to care in rural areas. And we can talk about that more offline. I now call upon the gentlewoman from the state of Illinois, Ms. Underwood, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm encouraged to see critical investments throughout VA's budget to meet the health and economic needs of our veterans, needs that have grown considerably over the past year and will persist long after the COVID-19 pandemic has ended. Research from the Commonwealth Fund predicts that mental health fallout from the pandemic will likely last for years and potentially even generations. And that's why the $1.5 billion increase for veterans mental health services in VA's budget is so important. This funding also includes a 92% increase in funding for suicide prevention programs, another critical priority given that demand for the Veterans Crisis Line increased by 59% over the past year. Mr. Secretary, looking at the requested $1.5 billion increase in mental health funding broadly and the $287 million increase for suicide prevention specifically, can you provide more details on the specific programs or initiatives where this funding will be focused?
Yeah, thanks very much. I agree with everything that you said. I do think that we have seen we've seen a massive increase in demand for video and telehealth, including increase in demand for mental health services in both telehealth and video health. As I said earlier, we're seeing about a 30% increase of among all VHA users. So that in our health administration for mental health services, that's more than, as I said earlier, 1.5 million veterans having received mental health services over the period of FY20, which was just half pandemic, obviously. So among the programs that we anticipate continuing our increased hiring of mental health professionals, we hired a net increase of 880 healthcare providers in FY20. This is in a mental health community in the country broadly that is way over demand and way under supply.
That's right.
So this is a major challenge for us that we're going to continue to invest in. And importantly, we're also investing in new opportunities that you all have given us, including as several members have already indicated, in new grant making to local providers for mental health services. So that's the biggest, one of the biggest innovations in this year's budget is making sure that we're funding the authorized programs that you all enacted late last year for local providers of mental health care services.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Another requested funding increase in VA's budget is for readjustment benefits, which include vocational programs that help veterans secure and retain quality jobs that pay good wages. These programs are especially timely right now. According to the most recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the job openings level in the US is at 8.1 million, the highest since the job opening series began in December 2000. One cause of the high level of openings, even with elevated unemployment rates, is the skill gap between the needs of employers and the background and training of individuals in the labor force. Mr. Secretary, how will the funding that VA has requested for vocational programs help prepare veterans for a rapidly evolving workforce and ensure that they're prepared to succeed in the jobs of today and tomorrow?
Thank you. I am very proud of our programming through VBA and through the Education Services team. Included in there is our voc rehab training effort, as well as additional programming that Mr. Cawthorn had asked about earlier, including innovative new low carbon training options, which leads to important long-term high growth, high wage growth opportunities for our vets. And then, of course, as I said earlier in response to question, the VRAP program, which you all authorized in the American Recovery Plan, dedicates nearly $400 million for high demand jobs as identified by the Department of Labor, including incentivizing new providers to enter there by saying you'll get full payment for your participation in the program once a vet is employed. So it's not enough to train, but it requires the vet to be trained and then a job to be given. And so this kind of, and by the way, we're seeing continued subscription by trainers in the programming, including in vocational programming, because of the opportunity that this provides. They're not pushed away by the higher accountability standards that come with the program that you all enact.
Great. Well, Mr. Secretary, we are certainly looking forward to developing further opportunities to create good jobs through the American Jobs Plan and the infrastructure and recovery legislation that is coming in the next several months as we build back better. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Iowa, Dr. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and Secretary McDonough for being here. It's greatly appreciated. The department's budget, as we heard earlier, request includes continued investment in the successful implementation of the Mission Act. However, there are a number of issues that the VA still needs to address. For example, in my home state of Iowa, a community partner, Siouxland PACE, has gone months without any response from the VA to inquiries surrounding unpaid claims for 15 months of service to 4 veterans. As you increase the volume of veterans care agreements with community providers of care, as more veterans seek care in the community, what are the department's plans for ensuring timely payment of claims for community-based services rendered to veterans?
Thank you very much. Is it called Siouxland?
Siouxland PACE, P-A-C-E.
Okay, so I'll follow up on that specifically, and we'll be back in touch with you on that.
Okay.
Obviously, we feel like we're making progress on claims payment. Since Mission Act implementation through May 2021, we've processed 5.8 million claims, dispersed $20 billion in payments. Current outstanding claims, this may be Siouxland, current outstanding claims, both current and aged, total now 49,000 for about $234 million. This is down, by the way, from a peak in February of last year of 3.5 million delayed payments. And so we're almost there, but we're not there yet on catching up with the backlog. Importantly, auto adjudication rates have doubled over the past quarter. And we are providing decisions within 2 days for 47 to 51% of claims, all inbound claims. And we're paying our third-party administrators are paying clean claims within 30 days of receipt, which gets us in the kind of window of being competitive with Medicare. So we're coming down the learning curve here, ma'am. I'm not saying we're fully done yet, but we're coming down the learning curve. We're getting better at it. And then I hope over time, this ends up being the source of some innovation for us to be in a position to pay more promptly, pay for performance, have greater accountability on the kinds of services that are getting covered. So these are all things that we got to get better at. We're getting better. I'll follow up on Siouxland PACE, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. So maybe part of this, and you've tried to address in responding to claims and in having clean claims, which certainly as a provider and a physician, I've dealt with that situation before. But are you making efforts to reduce the administrative burden on community providers by the forms that you have them fill out, by the requisitions, and so that they know exactly what is required of them in order to submit a clean claim?
Yeah, and in fact, we are. And I'd be interested to see if you hear that from people in your district. And there are even arguments that we do a less good job of providing that clarity for care in the direct care system. And so I'd like to see us reducing paperwork and increasing efficiency in community care and in direct care so that we can get to providing the vets the care that they need.
Well, I thank you for that, and certainly to have better responsiveness, as you indicated, would be helpful. Representative Nels had asked you about the 14,000 full-time equivalents that you had added last year, and whether or not they were had been fully hired. And you're proposing to hire 28,400 more people in 2022, paid for by American Rescue Plan funds, and then move them to the regular budget in 2023. And you mentioned that this is necessary because of the surge following the pandemic. So one would expect if there's a surge that it would be temporary following the pandemic once those individuals have received care. So my concern is that in hiring this additional almost 40,000 employees, that then what happens once this surge is passed, and are these people that would be temporary, and then you're unable to end their employment once they're in the VA system. So could you address that quickly? And I apologize, I'm out of time. Thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, so some of what you see in the budget request is churn. Our churn is less than the private system that you're much more familiar with than I am, but at about 9% turnover, we're well below industry standard, even half of industry standard. Which I'm very proud of, and I think we as an agency should be proud of. And that's because getting to work with vets is a great opportunity. And then some of it is because we have vacancies that we've needed to fill, including in mental health. And so this is a major challenge for us as a country, because it's true, and I know it's true in my home state, which is just north of yours, where demand for mental health care far outstrips supply. And so we're going to continue to chase that supply. And then we'll make some decisions, and we'll be very candid with you as we're making these assessments over the life of this year about what the experience is telling us. I will say this, I came in here being a skeptic about the actuarial system that we've been using for care in VA. Now, John calls me to Friday night meetings on a very regular basis. And what I'm finding is that this model is held up pretty well over time. Your staff work a lot with us on it. We welcome your personal involvement on it. We'll show you the homework on it and why we're getting to where we're getting. But we don't want to hire any more than we need, but we do want to hire everything we do need. And that's what this budget will allow us to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time.
Thank you, Dr. Miller-Meeks. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Allred, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary McDonough. It's great to see you. Thank you for your lifetime of service to the country. And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of good news that we have to talk about. I'm particularly want to point to the VA success in vaccinating veterans, family members, caregivers, and employees against COVID-19. Here in my district, as you may know, last year we opened a new VA facility, the Garland VA Medical Center, which was a donated hospital that I worked for about a year on. And I was there back in March as they hosted a COVID vaccination clinic, and they were able to vaccinate 500 veterans that day. That was their first day. And I know they've done many more since then. And that's just great progress. I think it's about the leadership we have here locally, and also a testament to the VA, how quickly they got that up and running. And I want to invite you to visit the Garland VA anytime, quite soon, if you can. As you know, Texas has the second most veterans in the country. We have the most women veterans in the country, and we will very soon be #1 actually in veterans. And a lot of them are here in my area. I wanted to talk about the office, the new office you created, the Office of Resolution of Management, Diversity and Inclusion, which I guess was formerly separate offices, and the increase in funding that you have in this budget for that. Here in Texas, we have an incredibly diverse set of veterans. We also have a diverse set of folks who work in the VA. And, it's not just by race, as I said, it's also by gender and LGBTQ status as well. And if you could just sort of, discuss a little more what your plans are for that office and how we can support you in those efforts, because I'm very interested in it, and I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, and it's really good to see you. I am excited about the opportunities that we have both in your district and in Texas and then across the country in terms of the fact that we are seeing greater reliance on VA services from our vets than we have in some time. And I think that's a good, very good signal. Some of that has to do with Mission Act. Some of that has to do with our getting better at meeting time requirements. And a lot of it has to do with the excellence of the people that we have in this agency. I mentioned one, Doreen Summers, in my opening remarks. There's thousands and thousands of people like her, and it's a great opportunity to work here. I will say that you guys have already helped us a lot on this question of diversity, because one of the reasons we wanted to consolidate the work of two offices into one and to seek the increase of $13 million, almost $13 million, 12.9, is because of the new authorities and requirements you gave us in the Sampson Act last year, which really focused attention on the fact that the fastest growing contingent of veterans in our care are women veterans. And we have to get better at not only providing them the services and access to technology that they're right to expect, but that they can operate in a context, in a milieu, in an environment that does not see them suffering harassment or hassled or even worse. And so you've already given us those authorities. You've given us a lot of important investments in the Office of Women Health programming over the course of the last several years. This budget allows us to continue those investments in technology, gender-specific care, and in women's health professionals. And then through this new office and the $13 million that you've given us, gives us a fulcrum on which to require accountability with the new authorities you've given us in the Sampson Act. So I feel really good about where we are on this. That doesn't mean I think we are where we need to be. There's a long way for us to go, but with the new authorities and these resources, we'll be in a good spot.
Well, that's great, Mr. Secretary. With any new office, I guess we'll be following along and seeing how that works. And I appreciate your work and your service. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. I now call upon our distinguished chair of our Appropriations Subcommittee on Energy and Water and an original member, well, when she originally came to Congress, a member of this committee, Ms. Capter of the state of Ohio.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, very much. This has been a most interesting hearing. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for your great work and also the responsiveness that your staff provides to all of us. It's deeply appreciated. I wanted to ask you if someone on the staff could look at the history of the VA's medical centers and their affiliation with various universities. One of the communities that I represent, Toledo, Ohio, was affiliated with the University of Michigan in a different state over half century ago. Since that time, Toledo itself developed, working with the state of Ohio, a university, hospital, and medical center. And we respect our Ann Arbor, Michigan relationship. I'm actually a graduate of the University of Michigan. So, but there are certain issues that attend to that affiliation. Number one, our veterans have to travel an hour to get there. It's a big place and parking is difficult. And particularly when they have to go through cancer infusions and procedures like that, it becomes really, for some, quite a difficult journey. It is beyond me why the Veterans Facility at Toledo, which is a clinic, which is right next door on the other side of the driveway to the Veterans Clinic, why we can't get point of care closer to home where it would be better for the veteran if they so choose. So I would just ask you perhaps to review, I don't expect an answer on this today, but to look at some of these affiliations that are over a half a century old, and in some places maybe you could consider dual affiliation for certain services where it is obvious it makes sense. So I don't understand all the accounting of this, but in terms of the convenience to the veterans, I would urge you to take a look at it and perhaps find someone on your staff I could deal with.
Count on that. Will do.
Thank you very much. Number two, again, I don't need an answer on this today, but in terms of VA research, which I'm very interested in, particularly in terms of brain health, whether it is biochemical imbalances or concussions, you have one program sustaining the VA department along with the Department of Energy. There's a collaboration there, and there's an increase in funding. I'm very interested in what that is because at our Argonne labs, we've just discovered a certain protein that exists in a certain part of the brain that is very important to brain function. And we have supercomputing capacity there. And I'm very interested in your research agenda as the VA and how you affiliate with other parts of the government that might be able to help, particularly in a complex area like brain injury and condition, which cannot be seen with the eye oftentimes. So I'm really interested in also what percentage of your research relates to the brain, knowing that we have so many conditions at the VA that onset from military service. And we will provide additional questions to the record on that. My main question regards the health workforce. If your staff could provide us with your staff openings, your shortages in different arenas, so that we as a committee on both sides of the aisle could be recruiters ourselves and let people know where in the VA there are openings. Depending on where you live, sometimes you don't have that, it's not so easily accessible. So we would appreciate that very much. And I will share a conversation I had with General Milley recently, where we were talking about the shortages at our defense hospitals as well, and some of these specialty skills relating to brain condition and to human performance. And how it would be we could work together as the Department of Defense, perhaps the VA, that's why I'm mentioning this, and forgiving the debt of graduates from medical school or advanced behavioral nursing as a condition of serving in underserved areas. Perhaps this could be a government-wide effort somehow. We want to help you, but perhaps a conversation with General Milley might make sense. It's my understanding we're about 100,000 doctors short nationally in this arena of brain health, and probably 400,000 behavioral nurses. So this is a national problem.
Yes. You and I had a short discussion about this at the last hearing. I'm enthusiastic and beyond thrilled about an opportunity to work with you on this. We will get you that. And I will also reach out to General Milley and to Secretary Austin. I just say one thing about the second point about our collaboration with DOE. I think our collaboration there is on our genomic health programming, our Million Veterans initiative, but I'll find that for sure and we'll come back to you. The reason I raise that is it's among the most innovative things that we're doing. We've recently gotten our 850,000th volunteer for that programming, where we're able to build now the biggest genetic health database in a public health system in the world, which is creating all sorts of new innovative research opportunities for us. There are obviously some brain-related developments there, but it's overwhelmingly focused on genetics. Nevertheless, on genome, but nevertheless, I will come back to you on all of this because I think as Mr. Chicano and I have discussed since our last hearing, and then Dr. Clancy, who heads our research effort when she's not acting deputy secretary, and I have discussed, this is an area of intense institutional interest for us. So I'd love to figure out how we develop that kind of relationship with you.
I think that would be very, very helpful. And I know I'm over time, but there are two major brain banks, one from the Stanley Foundation and another from the Boston University, I believe it is. In Boston, there's a large brain bank. Several of our members are interested in that, including Congressman Gonzalez. And we need analytics on all of that now that we have this physical, what would I call it?
Kind of repository almost.
There you go, repository.
Yeah.
We really need to delve deeper.
The Army was investing. I mean, that's why General Milley is the right point of contact on this. That the work that the Army did from about 2004 to now is really innovative, really innovative work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Capter, and I appreciate your bringing up the academic affiliations and the need to review how all those work and updating perhaps new affiliations, and to make sure I'm interested in the equitable distribution of the research dollars throughout the country. And I know that the next person I'm going to be calling on, the next representative, has done some extensive thinking about this issue about academic affiliations and not threatening the institutions that already have the affiliations, but making room for more affiliations. And Dr. Ruiz has also been concerned about medical residencies in our country. And I know that Ms. Capter, you have been really interested and committed to this issue of our physician and provider shortage and advanced practice nurses. So with that, and I've revealed my concern by taking this moment to take an editorial moment. But Dr. Ruiz, I call on you for 5 minutes, and I'm very curious to know what you're going to be asking the Secretary.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, and thank you, Representative Capter, for pursuing more behavioral nurses and addressing the provider shortages we have in our country. Not only do we have an absolute shortage, but we have a distribution equity crisis at our hands as well. So not only do we need to train more providers, but we need to send them where they're needed the most, given the disparities in health and lack of good health outcomes in certain areas, large areas in our country. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Maybe we'll throw in a little baseball chat in a little bit, but my questions are also in line regarding research. And as an emergency medicine physician, representative of a large veteran population in Riverside County, and founder and co-chair of the bipartisan bicameral Burn Pits Caucus, I'm determined to help our veterans receive the highest quality care they need and earn and deserve. And as a public health expert, I recognize how crucial it is to invest in research that is vital to better address veterans' health needs. So investing in advanced toxic exposure research must be a priority of the VA, which is why I'm encouraged to see a $7 million increase of toxic exposure, military exposure research in this year's budget. But Mr. Secretary, methodology is everything in medical and public health research. And we can't wait for the perfect 20-year longitudinal double cohort study. We just don't have the time. Veterans are dying and becoming permanently disabled as we speak. We need the right methodologies with the right questions within the right time frame to act on the research and save lives. Mr. Secretary, how will this increase in funding support the VA's mission to ensure that our veterans exposed to toxic airborne hazards don't wait decades to receive the benefits and healthcare they've earned and deserve?
Thanks, Mr. Ruiz. It's great to see you. And I'm really proud of the increase in research funding that we're asking for. I'm very proud of the research that VA does. It's hard to open a newspaper right now and not encounter a story about VA research on long COVID, for example, because of the way we aggregate data, because we're the way that we function as a system. We provide really critically important research capacity that strengthens the entire system, but in the meantime, really strengthens outcomes for our vets. On toxic exposure expressly, as you and I have discussed, I agree that it's a mistake to wait for one line of effort to give us all the scientific answers on such a critical set of questions. That's why we, working with the White House, have instituted an interagency process, drawing on expertise not only here, not only at DOD, but also in HHS, in Department of Labor. So getting access to OSHA, getting access to the institutes, the National Cancer Institute, the Institutes of Health, drawing on all of this information to help inform decisions on a timely basis, given that we have veterans who are suffering and
Yes.
now. And so I'm
Thank you,
on the
Mr.
same page as you, and that's what we're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And last month, the VA announced 3 new presumptive conditions: bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, and Parkinsonism associated with exposure to Agent Orange. Additionally, the VA is looking at whether to authorize presumptions of service-associated asthma, rhinitis, and sinusitis due to their exposure to toxic burn pits in Southwest Asia, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan. And so I just want to publicly applaud your efforts to expand access to veterans as a result of toxic exposures. And I look forward to working with you to further increase that access and presumptions to even more veterans in the coming months. So what research will you prioritize with the additional funding, and how will this pave the road for the VA to add more presumptions sooner rather than later?
Well, since you're a doctor and I'm not, I think what I'll do is what I'd rather do is have our research team come sit with you and talk you through how we're thinking about this. And I think it would make sense for us to arrange for you to sit with, the people at the Domestic Policy Council in the White House who are leading this integrative all of government approach, so that you can see that there too. And so how about I take that one and I'll get the right people up there to talk with you about it.
Well, I appreciate your leadership efforts and dedication in ensuring we take care of our nation's heroes. Veterans in this country need advocates, not obstacles, when seeking the care they deserve. And I appreciate you for being an advocate for them. And I also appreciate our common goal of beating the Yankees whenever possible. So, yes.
The Twins are starting with them there tonight, so we're going to need all the help we can get.
All right, my friend. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yield back.
I see that although, Mr. Secretary, you have origins in Boston, I suppose you're not at root a Red Sox fan. But Dr. Ruiz, I thank you for your expertise. I thank you for your advocacy. I'm very proud of the bipartisan interest in the toxic exposure bill, and Ranking Member Boss and I have had, I think, some very frank and sincere conversations. And I thank him for where he's coming from on the bill. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get to a bipartisan agreement, Mr. Secretary. And we're going to have some historic legislation that will make its way through the Congress. I now call upon the distinguished representative from the state of Michigan, former intelligence officer with the CIA, Representative Slotkin, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman Takano, and welcome back, Secretary McDonough. Always happy to have you here. I have to say, I was thrilled to see the increase in your budget request for suicide prevention. The last time you were here, we talked about how, we all know it's just an epidemic among veterans, but in some states, like the state of Michigan, our veteran suicide rate is way higher than even the national veteran average. So just your 92% increase in requested money is really much appreciated, as is your willingness to work with us on toxic exposure. My question is really related to the Air Commission. To review the bidding, we had a hearing a few weeks ago on the Air Commission, which, as I understand it, is basically BRAC for the VA, right? It's a proposed cutting back of VA resources around the country. And my problem that I have is the assessment for what we should keep together, what should we expand, what should we cut back, is based on an era that's before COVID, that's before the real sort of entry of telemedicine, right? And the way that we've really learned to use that. And then, of course, since I joined Dr. Ruiz and a bunch of others on toxic exposure, it's doesn't take into light what we might be able to do here on giving more access to care for people who have been exposed to burn pits and other things. So help me understand why I shouldn't be deeply skeptical of the Air Commission and what the results are going to be.
The Air Commission was enacted in the Mission Act. That's basically 2 years ago now, I think. It's the Asset and Infrastructure Review Commission. It is loosely modeled on the BRAC process. So I inherited this, so let me tell you how I'm thinking about it. And I'm not trying to get you to be unskeptical or skeptical or otherwise. My commitment is to handle this 100% transparently, because I think that's the best way to make public policy decisions, especially as it relates to questions like this, infrastructure and access. So 2 weeks ago, we published the final criteria by which we will make any decisions about our infrastructure. That was a product that was arrived at through public comment. We finalized that and published that. We'll be happy to send that to you. In that document, you should see several of the things that you just highlighted. Concerns about access to care, concerns about what the impact of the pandemic has been, concerns about what technology means for the future of access for healthcare for our vets, and then the role of the VA in training new healthcare providers, the role of VA in medical research, and then lastly, the role of VA through fourth mission in providing service to the rest of the country. That should be the basis on which we make decisions. That's public. The next thing we have to do is submit our commissioners. We're in the process of doing that. We're waiting for a couple people on the Hill to get their people too. Then we'll put those people out there. Then we'll be in a process of developing both the market assessments on which we make the decisions and the recommendations that we think are needed to fulfill our requirements of service to our vets. I would urge my commitment to all of the members of Congress, including you, Ms. Slotkin, is to take a look at all this information as we're developing it, ask us hard questions. We'll answer those questions publicly, transparently, and in the public. And then we'll resolve this over the course of the life of this commission, not because we sneak it through customs and surprise everybody, but because we've all come to some kind of consensus on this. Importantly, the market assessments have been ongoing based on data that does precede the pandemic. And in fact, by the time these decisions are implemented, will be, in some cases, 6 or 8 years old. For that reason, I'm looking at whether I can't ask for additional information to inform those market assessments. That will be governed by whether I can do that pursuant to the statute that Congress enacted. But there's no limitation on you asking for this information, getting smart about this information, prosecuting this information, and pushing us on it. And I talked to the chairman about this too, and Mr. Bost. And if you guys are going to have hearings about it, that would continue to have hearings about it. That would seem to make sense to me. But this is something that I take very seriously. My obligations are not only to do this well, but to do this transparently. And I'll do that with you all very much in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I see my time is up. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Slotkin. I now will call upon the gentleman from Arizona and someone who's demonstrated that being a Harvard graduate and a Marine are two sides of the same coin. I was going to say not an oxymoron, but I don't want to be insulting to Harvard. So I now call upon Representative Gallego for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Senator Kelly and I recently sent you a letter asking the VA to prioritize strengthening suicide prevention programs at the VA after a recent OIG report on lapses in mental health care at the Phoenix VA in 2019. I was glad to see your budget request significantly increase that funding for suicide prevention at the VA. Can you expand on how this increased funding will be allocated?
Sure. And thank you for the letter. I thought it was a very helpful and timely letter. So we are implementing, based on the National Suicide Prevention Strategy of 2018, a series of programs to include what we call Suicide Prevention 2.0, which has a lot of different manifestations. But a particular manifestation of this is our ability to use innovative data techniques to identify at-risk vets.
Okay.
And then and through a program called Reach Vet, be in touch with those vets who we are worried about. So the funding here will allow us to increase opportunities to reach out to at-risk vets. But the challenge for us, I was talking to a spouse recently who was worried that we're insufficiently prescriptive in the outreach. We're just checking in. We're not giving counsel or advice on the outreach. So increased funding here will allow us to increase that kind of activity, one. Two, then the big challenge for us is to find vets who are not in our care. We know that data shows that vets in our care do better, though still not well enough on suicide prevention, but do better. We have to now come up with innovative new opportunities to find vets at risk who are not in our care. You all have given us additional resources, including in the Hannon Act, which we will hit the road with next year in local grant making. So this budget allows us to adequately to fully fund the authorized grant making program there. And using some of these innovative techniques, I hope we can get not just the vets currently in our care, but to all vets, so that we can do with vets that what we in mental health and suicide prevention, what we do across the board, which is we show how it's done well. Vets show us how it's done well, and then we can get our hands around an epidemic that's an issue for veterans, yes, but it's an issue for the country. And
Right.
so I feel a particular obligation to do that and to do that well.
And then I think that's probably only have time for one question. The OIG found staffing shortages in mental health care likely contributed to errors that occurred in the Phoenix VA's mental health care system. Can you describe the VA's efforts, including through the VA's mental health hiring initiative, to reduce physician shortages in mental health care?
It's a major challenge for us. I acknowledge that right up front, as it is, by the way, as we were just talking about with Ms. Capter and Mr. Nels and others. This is a major challenge for us as a country because the demand for mental health professionals far outstrips supply. So interestingly, one of the things we've been able to do is to use new video platforms to increase the surface area of access to our mental health professionals across the country. I was in with Mr. Mann in Kansas, and what we saw there is a rural outpatient clinic, a CBOC, providing access to psychiatrists. I think one was in Phoenix and one was in Manhattan, New York. And so the ability to use new platforms to expand access to those, the unfortunately still limited providers, is an important aspect of this. And our budget allows us to maintain, the CARES Act allowed us to massively increase that. Our budget this year for FY22 allows us to maintain that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Gallego. Mr. Secretary, I do not have any more members in the queue for questioning you on this first panel or your counterpart. But I understand that you are interested in staying, and you're welcome to stay for the second panel. And I think that speaks very well of you, that you want to hear from our VSOs and the independent budget. So thank you very much for making yourself available for our members, and thank you for your testimony. And thank you for your commitment to our nation's veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple pages of follow-ups here. We'll do those. We'll get back to everybody, and I look forward to listening in to the testimony of our VSO colleagues. So thanks for allowing me the opportunity to do that. I'm going to take a quick break, but then I'll be right back here in my chair.
Well, we certainly appreciate what you're doing and the gesture. Thank you. Uh, I now will introduce the second panel of witnesses, and Secretary McDonough has indicated that he wants to remain on the call to make sure that he's able to listen to our second panel. So appearing before us today on the second panel is Mr. Richard Loeb, Senior Policy Counsel for the American Federation of Government Employees. Mr. Shane Learman, the Deputy National Legislative Director for Disabled American Veterans. Mr. Roscoe Butler, Associate Legislative Director of Government Relations for Paralyzed Veterans of America. Mr. Patrick Murray, National Legislative Service Director at the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And Mr. Joseph Chinelli, National Executive Director of American Veterans. Mr. Loeb, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boston, and members of the committee. On behalf of the American Federation of Government Employees and the 260,000 VA employees represented by our National Veterans Affairs Council, of whom more than 100,000 are veterans themselves, I'm delighted to be here today to provide AFG's views on the Department of Veterans Affairs fiscal year 2022 budget request. I'd like to make 4 points today. Point 1, AFG is generally pleased with President Biden's budget request for the VA. The proposed budget departs from the previous administration's agenda of starving the internal operations of the VA and favoring private sector providers. For example, in prior years, the VA left almost 50,000 funded in-house positions unfilled. It is high time that VA focus on rebuilding its in-house resources to meet the needs of our nation's veterans. Point 2, the rush to privatization via the Mission Act should stop, and the department should consider insourcing healthcare services as soon as it can. The early results of the Mission Act almost immediately validated AFG's warnings about its consequences. Fraudulent billing and other scandals, inferior treatment from private providers that led to costly duplication or remediation from VA's in-house experts, and uncontrolled costs that far exceeded even the generous funding provided for funding for private care that was provided. There is a place for private sector providers in the VA healthcare system, but it should only be to supplement a high-quality in-house VA capacity, not to replace it. President Biden's budget proposal suggests a departure from the destructive path to privatization. In 2022 and 2023, the Mission Act's VA Asset and Infrastructure Review, or AIR Commission, will examine the VA and make recommendations to the President on what facilities and departments to close, to remediate, or to build. AFG has recommended that the AIR Commission be delayed in its work. The White House and Congress should allow the benefits of new investments in the VA and its workforce to enhance the system's capacity to meet demand and provide the high-quality care our veterans deserve, rather than to rush to compile a plan for divestiture and privatization. Point 3, if Congress continues to provide enormous sums for private providers, it should mandate far more accountability. For example, the Mission Act's method of paying contractor administrative costs should be reconsidered. The experience to date does not provide any confidence that Mission Act contractors were chosen based on their competence at cost containment, especially administrative overhead. AFG asked the committee to consider controlling expenses by emulating the model used by the largest and most successful health insurance program in the country, the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, or FEHBP. Specifically, we recommend that VA require application of the contract cost principles used by the FEHBP to control private sector healthcare costs. FEHBP practices should also be used to negotiate contractor profits. The FEHBP uses the Federal Acquisition Regulation cost principles to determine the allowability and allocability of costs claimed by contractors. As a result, FEHBP experience-rated contractors' overhead costs are only between 4 to 9% of healthcare costs, far less than what the VA is paying. In addition, the FEHBP holds contractors to very modest profit margins. The application of these cost principles and profit guidelines would provide a measure of discipline on the enormous costs incurred by the Mission Act's private care contractors and ensure that unallowable costs are not paid. And lastly, point 4, AFG appreciates the administration's efforts to have the federal government be a model employer with respect to compensation, respect for the merit-based civil service, and its commitment to fulfilling its collective bargaining obligations. We agree that this new posture will help the VA to recruit and retain a high-quality workforce. However, there remains one glaring problem with the VA's treatment of its unionized employees, and to remedy this issue, we appreciate the efforts of you, Chairman Takano, in reintroducing the VA Employee Fairness Act. Specifically, the VA must extend full collective bargaining and representational rights to its Title 38 workforce. Medical professionals in the private sector have full collective bargaining rights. equivalent to those of workers in other occupations. We urge Congress to restore VA to require VA to restore collective bargaining rights to all Title 38 employees. On January 22nd, 2021, President Biden signed an executive order rescinding the Trump-era orders on union activities. Even though President Biden's executive order was issued more than 4 months ago, there are still some VA facility managers who are resisting implementation. The VA has failed so far to restore official time for Title 38 employees, telling us that it has been under review since March. AFG urges the VA to move swiftly to remedy this problem and restore these rights to Title 38 workers. The end to unrelenting privatization, outsourcing, and austerity at the VA, as reflected in the President's FY22 budget proposal, is a win for veterans and healthcare consumers, and all those who benefit from the VA as a national leader in integrated care, best practices in medical and mental health, research, and medical training. Thank you for your time. I'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Mr. Chairman, I think you're muted.
I was muted. You didn't have to, it wasn't your imagination. I got to get back to my list here. Thank you, Mr. Loeb. I now recognize Mr. Learman for 5 minutes of your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boston, members of the committee. On behalf of the Independent Budget Veteran Service Organizations, or the IBVSOs, a partnership between DAV, PVA, and VFW, we thank you for the opportunity today. For more than 30 years, the IBVSOs have developed and presented recommendations to ensure that VA remains appropriately funded and capable of carrying out all aspects of its mission to serve our nation's ill and injured veterans, their caregivers, surviving spouses, and children, both now and in the future. I will be covering our recommendations concerning the Veterans Benefits Administration, the Board of Veterans Appeals, and the National Cemetery Administration. In reference to the Veterans Benefits Administration, or VBA, the IBVSOs recommend approximately $3.6 billion for VBA operations. The administration's proposed budget is $3.4 billion in new appropriations, in addition to $272 million previously appropriated in the American Rescue Plan to assist in reducing the claims and appeals backlogs. Mr. Chairman, while we are pleased to see the administration's proposed amount for VBA, we are greatly concerned about the current claims backlog. In February 2020, there were 70,000 claims pending over 125 days. And as of May 29th of this year, there are 187,000 pending over 125 days. The administration's proposed budget recommends an additional 429 FTE for VBA, whereas the IBVSOs recommend 1,000 new FTE to address the rising VA claims backlog, prepare for the influx of claims from the recent addition of the 3 new diseases due to Agent Orange presumptives, and to expand the capability of VA call centers. In fiscal year 2020, VBA had over $700 million in shortfalls for funding necessary IT projects, including many that would address the needs of accredited VSOs working in VA regional offices. We are pleased to see that the administration's proposal of $276 million is for VBA IT. Mr. Chairman, for fiscal year 2022, the IBVSOs recommended $216 million for the Board of Veterans Appeals, an increase of approximately $26 million over last year. We are pleased the administration is requesting $228 million for the board, although we are not certain it would provide enough FTE or employees to address the current hearing backlog. As of June 1st of this year, there are over 49,000 pending Appeals Modernization Act hearings with the board and 42,000 pending legacy appeal hearings, for a total of over 91,000 pending hearings. This is an increase of 15,000 from just last year. The administration's proposed budget will provide an additional 129 FTE, which includes 35 veterans law judges, with the American Rescue Plan providing an additional 33 employees the board will add potentially 162 FTE. Based on the increased hearing backlog compared to just a year ago and the increased rate of hearing requests, we recommend an increase of 200 FTE for the board to address the now 91,000 pending hearings. The board uses several IT platforms such as VBMS, the Veterans Appeals Control and Locator System, or VACOLS, and the new system called CaseFlow. However, VACOLS is the legacy program for tracking and maintaining appeals within the board, and CaseFlow was created to replace VACOLS. However, CaseFlow has many functionalities yet to be implemented, and both systems must currently be used by the board, which greatly reduces their efficiency. The IBVSOs recommend $15 million in IT funding to accelerate and complete the board's CaseFlow system. And we are pleased to see the administration's proposal of $12.5 million for CaseFlow and an additional $3 million for the Board of Veterans Appeals IT. Mr. Chairman, in reference to the National Cemetery Administration, or the NCA, for fiscal year 2022, the IBVSOs recommend approximately $365 million, an increase of $13 million over last year's appropriated levels. The administration's proposed budget is $42 million over the previous fiscal year, and we applaud this significant proposed increase as it will allow maintenance of over 4 million grave sites and add 97 FTE due to increased workload and new cemeteries. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony on the budget for VBA, the board, and the NCA. I look forward to any questions you and the committee may have.
Well, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Learman. I now recognize Mr. Butler for 5 minutes for his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boss, and members of the committee. I will be providing information on the IB's recommendation for the Veterans Health Administration. For FY 2022, the IB is recommending $81.4 billion for VA medical care. By comparison, the administration requested a total of $78.1 billion in new appropriation, but we understand the department also anticipates receiving $17 billion from the American Rescue Plan. The latter figures are important because, to our knowledge, should the administration full funding request for VA healthcare and the additional $17 billion were to be approved, it would mark the first time the department was fully funded. Our current services estimate reflects the impact of projected uncontrollable inflation on the cost to provide services to veterans currently using the system. This estimate also assumes a 2.2% increase for pay and benefits across the board for all VA employees in the coming year. The IB's estimate of growth in patient workload is based on a projected increase of approximately 80,000 new unique patients. We estimate the cost of the new unique users to be approximately $1.9 billion. We also recommended several additional initiatives to improve the delivery of healthcare to enrolled veterans. Specifically, an additional $1.4 billion would be needed to fill at least 25% of pending vacancies, which would be around 10,750 full-time employees. The IB recommends VA long-term care services and supports program be increased by an additional $335 million to expand capacity to meet the unmet demand of aging veterans. To support VA's caregivers program expansion, we are recommending $73 million to hire approximately 700 full-time employees and $361 million to cover the cost of stipends and other benefits to accelerate phase 2 of the expansion by year October 1, 2021. The IB anticipates there would be significant carryover of prosthetic and sensory funds, so we are not calling on for additional funding at this time. To increase funding for women veterans health care, the IB recommends investing an additional $200 million, of which 120 would go to medical services. The IB supports provisions in the administration's budget proposal that will provide $105 million for the Women's Health Program, $706 million for gender-specific care, and $1.5 million for the Center for Women Veterans. As the members of this committee well know, VA medical community care was significantly impacted by the pandemic, and we anticipate the deferral of care by veterans could lead to an increase in community care in FY 2022. Therefore, the IBVSO recommends $20.7 billion for the coming year, which reflects the growth in current services as impacted by uncontrollable medical inflation and utilization increases. In the area of medical and prosthetic research, the IB recommends $902 million for VA research, which is slightly higher than the administration proposed $882 million. Finally, the department's administration and miscellaneous program, specifically information technology, the IBVSOs recommend $5.2 billion to sustain all of VA's critical IT programs for VHA, VBA, and NCA. Another $42 million should be allocated to complete 9 specific projects for the Office of Research and Development, which in turn will support VA's research program more effectively. Also, we recommend approximately $3 billion go toward the department's electronic health record modernization. Half of the amount would go to the Cerner contract, which is an increase of $300 million due to the expansion scope of work. $1.2 billion should be allocated for VHA infrastructure upgrades, network equipment, and other IT infrastructure upgrades at locations making the conversion to Cerner's EHR. The remaining funds would be designed for the project management office and accelerate deployment of VA centralized scheduling system in FY 2022. This completes my portion of the oral testimony, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Butler, for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Murray for 5 minutes for his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee. On behalf of the Independent Budget Veteran Service Organizations, thank you for the opportunity to offer our comments regarding economic opportunity issues and infrastructure. While VA has received increased funding levels, a persistent lack of regular oversight, IT development, resources for facilities management, modernization, and sufficient personnel numbers continue to negatively impact access for an increasing number of veterans. The recent BLS veteran unemployment numbers are 4.4%. It's lower than it has been in the past year, but there's still a ways to go. The IBVSOs strongly support programs like Vet Tech and VRAP to strengthen existing retraining job opportunities and establish new resources to get veterans gainfully employed. The early successes of programs like Vet Tech and VRAP show that an investment in veteran economic outcomes is incredibly beneficial. The IBVSOs call for full funding of veteran employment programs such as these. VA's VR&E program has successfully helped many service-connected veterans pursue employment and educational opportunities. However, the IBVSOs remain concerned about high caseloads VR&E counselors maintain, as it limits the amount of time they can spend with veteran clients assessing their current status, needs, goals, and what determines meaningful employment for that veteran. The IBVSOs recommend VAIG conduct an assessment of the VR&E program, especially after the changes driven by COVID-19. We believe it is vital to understand how COVID affected this office and how the counselors were able to pivot to change in situation. This assessment would determine the average amount of time each counselor spends working with a veteran, the rate of staff turnover, the length of time in between counselor engagements, and the length of employment for veterans having gone through VR&E. We also believe there should be more regular information available about VA programs like this, similar to the Monday morning workload report from VBA. The digital GI Bill upgrade is long overdue improvement to a critical program office within VA, which will accommodate many requests Congress and VSOs have been making for years. A project such as this will help set up VA for success for future years to come. Congress must provide robust oversight on this upgrade to ensure this latest IT improvement is correctly implemented and mistakes of the past are not repeated. Our nation's infrastructure needs improvement. And with a proposed much needed infusion of $18 billion for VA facilities, it's potentially part of a larger national infrastructure package. The IBVSOs are very appreciative of this proposal, and given the gap in funding identified by VA's SKIP process, such an infusion is certainly justified. However, given the current focus on the issue, we believe it's time to consider wholesale change, beginning with revamping the strategic capital investment planning process. In reference to the $18 billion proposed infusion, VA's own testimony on May 27th, it stated to determine the most appropriate investments for this recapitalization effort, VA will leverage data-driven process to identify potential sites. Why is that not information already determined? What is the purpose of having a SKIP process if it's not to determine priorities in infrastructure? The SKIP process needs to change to reflect an actual plan of projects so they can be completed based on priority. Insufficient personnel is also an obstacle to timely and cost-effective infrastructure and maintenance and construction. The IBVSOs recommend that VA increase its internal capacity to plan and manage infrastructure and construction projects by hiring additional personnel with subject matter expertise in the Office of Construction and Facilities Management, within each VISN, and at every VA medical center. Congress should also consider utilizing the Army Corps of Engineers to manage some or all of VA major construction projects, as well as private sector construction management services to increase timeliness and cost effectiveness. Finally, while we await the formation of the Air Commission, we do not believe we should wait for its completion to conduct maintenance, critical upgrades and modernizations, and new construction of already necessary facilities. The AIR process will inform the future of VA infrastructure, but the $60+ billion backlog represents infrastructure needs now. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boss, this concludes my portion of the testimony. Be pleased to answer any questions you or any members may have.
I want to thank Mr. Murray for his testimony, and I now want to call upon Mr. Chinelli and recognize him for 5 minutes for his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Inclusive Congressionally Chartered Veteran Service Organization, working for our fellow 19 million American veterans and their families. AMVETS is honored to provide our views on the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs budget request for fiscal year 2022. Over this past Memorial Day, we hosted our first Rolling to Remember demonstration here in Washington. This is now the nation's largest veterans event, annually bringing together tens of thousands of veterans advocates from across the United States, riding their motorcycles to highlight critical issues, to demand increased accounting for the 82,000 service members still missing in action, as well as raise awareness of the many veterans dying by suicide each day. We will never forget our POWs, MIAs, and we won't stop fighting for real solutions to the suicide crisis. This is a powerful advocacy platform with tremendous reach. We will ride each year till we all come home, until all who make it home are well. Last Congress, legislators bickered for nearly 2 years over spending $180 million for nonprofit programs. Yet we'll likely rubber stamp the president's request to increase the VA's general mental health budget by $1.5 billion, reaching a record $13.5 billion. It is challenging to understand why lawmakers would spend an entire Congress arguing over $180 million, but will let $1.5 billion slide by with minimal discussion on the long-term outcomes of effectiveness of these programs and pharmaceuticals. In our sustained demand for a fresh, critical look at the suicide epidemic and its causation, we must confront hard realities. We are failing our nation's veterans. We expect our service members to be the strongest, most physically and mentally exceptional individuals they can be until the day they separate from service. Then all of our policies favor veterans being sick and disabled, with little vision, path, or messaging to help veterans become the best versions of themselves. How does such a generous system lead to such bleak outcomes? VA rightfully compensates for service-connected disabilities. The intent is good, but there is something big missing. If you are well when you leave the military, you are largely left out. If you are broken, you have tons of valuable support available throughout the VA. The system, as it now, fails to provide tangible leadership and training for veterans upon their separation from service, failing to encourage meaningful, positive goals, providing no incentive for physical, mental, and financial wellness. AMVETS argues that the vision is the most important component missing from the president's proposed budget and from the national conversation. The system needs to be reimagined, refocused, a vision laid out to encourage veterans to become the best, strongest person they can be. We need policies, benefits, and VA and VSO employees all systemically encouraging that outcome. We need to stop the victimization conversation. We need to stop telling veterans that they're victims and suicidal. We need to focus on thriving, not just surviving. Where is the positive messaging? Where are the billboards of veterans who've overcome great odds and lived incredible lives, served their communities, built businesses, achieved incredible physical feats, and taken care of their family and friends? Why, as veterans, are we being inundated with messaging suggesting that we are suicidal? We were Marines for life, Army strong, forged by the sea, aiming high, but now we're veterans suicidal? The messaging is wrong and it matters. The president's current budget justification reads the 2022 budget requests for the VA fulfills the president's sacred promise to care for America's veterans, their families, and survivors when they return from harm's way. But what if it read the 22 budget request for the VA will assist veterans and survivors in their efforts to achieve their personal goals, maintain a state of physical and mental wellness, provide service to their communities, and become their better selves? That describes the mindset VA needs in planning for FY22 and beyond. Coming up with a productive, modern version and a strategy is worthy of a presidential task force, which we propose in our written testimony. While the words of President Lincoln were true post-Civil War, this is not the reality for veterans today. Despite our injuries, we can do great things, and we need the VA to help us with that. We need a VA that incentivizes veterans to push themselves to be better. We need to get out of the business of spending billions on ineffective mental health services and pharmaceuticals focused only on treating veterans' symptoms. Instead, fund proactive programs that train veterans how to live happy, healthy lives of purpose. We need our president and this Congress to form a clear vision to build a VA focused on helping veterans reach their full potential. And that can start here with you this budget cycle. We owe an incredible debt of gratitude to the VA for their efforts as this relates to COVID-19 pandemic. The VA and its staffs have done an incredible job in administering vaccines and treating the tens of thousands of veterans who were infected. Our thoughts are with the families of veterans who died as a result of the virus. We know that had not been for the incredible actions of the VA and its staff, many more veterans would have lost their lives. We're grateful. AMVETS is honored to have this opportunity to present our views to you today. Understand that we are proposing some significant changes moving toward a VA of the future. We look forward to working with this committee on this and the many other issues. AMVETS will always strive to create better policies that lead to better outcomes for some 19 million veterans we serve. That concludes my testimony. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cinelli, for your testimony. All of your written testimony in full will be included in the hearing record, as will the full written testimonies of all of our witnesses. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning of the second panel. My first question is for the AFGE. Mr. Loeb, AFGE was very critical of the last administration for ending official time. Of course, official time allows union representatives to support employees who file grievances, appeal decisions, or otherwise need support. Earlier this year, Secretary McDonough restored official time. Have your union members seen the restoration of official time implemented across the department?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. The answer is, unfortunately, we have some facilities where the managers are reluctant to restore official time and or to provide us with adequate office space. So I would say that there is a bit of a gap or a lag between the administration's stated intentions and how they're being implemented actually in the VA. And of course, the VA has many different facilities and many different managers, but we are noticing an inconsistency, and in some cases, what I would call a reluctance to adopt or to adapt to the new policies.
Well, thank you for reporting back. I'm distressed to hear that we have recalcitrant managers who are failing to observe the new policy. I can assure those managers that this committee will perform oversight, its oversight abilities, and we will be working with the secretary to make sure that the new policy is implemented. My second question is to the independent budget representatives. The independent budget recommends an additional 1,000 FTEs for the Veterans Benefit Administration to primarily address the rising VA claims backlog and prepare for the influx of claims from the recent addition of 3 new diseases to the Agent Orange presumptive list. The VA budget allots 334 FTEs to the claims backlog. For the panel, do you think this will be enough? Why or why not? And anyone can jump in on that question.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure that we believe what is going to be the appropriate amount, whether 350 or 1,000, but what we do know is we're already seeing an increase in backlog cases. We're seeing that NEMR is now being applied to Blue Water Navy cases and the 3 new diseases for Agent Orange. All of those are going to create a lot more claims and create a backlog, coupled with the pending exams, CMP exams within VHA and the contractors. It's almost like a perfect storm coming. We want to make sure VBA is prepared enough. That's why we made part of the recommendation for 1,000, so that we can mitigate any continued explosion or expansion of the existing backlog.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lerman. You know, the budget also provides additional funding for the hearing backlogs. Does anyone from the independent budget have a comment as to the adequacy of that amount?
Thank you, Chairman. We recommended an increase of 100 FTE for the Board of Veterans Appeals every year for the last several years. This year, we increased our recommendation to 200, given the fact there are 91,000 pending hearings, an increase of 15,000 over the previous year. So while the 163 is a great start to include 35 additional veterans law judges, we're not sure it's going to be enough to overcome this existing hearing backlog, as it has been persisting for many years, and it only has gone down to about 60,000 pending hearings. And we want to find a way to eliminate this backlog.
Well, thank you for that. Let me just check to see how much time I have left, because I'm not seeing my screen. I have about 30 seconds. In your written testimony, Mr. Lerman, you note concerns regarding staffing levels in the VA VR&E office. Can you please detail these concerns for the committee and the importance of long-term retention for VR&E counselors to ensure consistent delivery of services to veterans?
Thank you, Chairman. I will defer this to Patrick Murray from the VFW.
Mr. Chairman, a really important change and modification to the VR&E office was the digitization of their processing. They're almost complete with that. The current staffing model, we believe, needs to be addressed with these changes. How did COVID affect the client-counselor relationship during the past year? Were they able to pivot appropriately the way that they were supposed to, the way that the transition counselors were not? So we really want to see some pretty robust oversight with the VR&E staff. They've had a hard time meeting that 1 to 125 counselor to client ratio for years.
Well, thank you for that, and I appreciate the conciseness of your response, but also it's also that the fullness of it. Representative Brownlee, I recognize. Actually, it's Mr. Bost, Ranking Member Bost. I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the question I have is I'm going to throw to each as I go down through each one of our witnesses. First off, starting with Mr. Learman, many of the comprehensive toxic exposure bills that we're working on in the House and the Senate, they can have a really, really high price tag. And they total in some cases as much as $1 trillion in mandatory money and would require offsets to comply the pay-go rules. We're all wanting to work on this, but we're wanting input from you. What would be your proposal of an offset that you would support to try to get that done?
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. In reference to making any comments or opinions in reference to an offset, I don't have anything prepared or anything that I'm willing to provide at this moment, but I do know that it is difficult when we're looking at providing veterans additional benefits and trying to find different ways to pay for it. We understand that greatly. However, we do know that we should never be balancing the budget or finding the offsets on the backs of other veterans getting those resources.
Mr. Butler? You're muted, I'm sorry.
I would agree with Mr. Lieberman's comments that, while we understand the difficulties in coming up with a way to pay for these increasing costs, we should never take funds from other VA programs to pay for those, to offset those programs to pay for the benefit. So there are other ways to pay for it. I'm not sure what that is at the moment, but we can't afford to sacrifice the benefits that veterans have earned to support other programs.
Mr. Murray?
Ranking Member Bost, I would suggest that if pay-fors were not used to send us to war, then pay-fors should not be used to take care of us afterwards.
Mr. Chanley?
So remember, the bottom line is if a service member is suffering and has been harmed because of his or her military service, then the federal government owes that veteran the proper compensation and the proper care. And that's going to have to be something Congress will have to figure out how to pay for.
Okay. And Mr. Lowe?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Bost. Well, we believe that there can be tremendous savings in the administrative costs that are going into the Mission Act, particularly with respect to the third-party administrators. So while I'm not about to suggest any type of offsets that my colleagues are much more expert at, I do think that there are some areas where the VA probably can save some money in outside medical care, particularly again with respect to the administrative costs that are being incurred by the contractors who are administering the program.
Well, I hope as we move on that each one of you will work with us as we're trying to get this done, because it is for the benefit, I believe, of the veterans that we must take care of this. But we also then have to be able to sell that to many, 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 many members of Congress so that we can get enough support, regardless of what the pay for is, and to provide those services. And also the buy-in of the American taxpayer. And you know, I'm taking a position, a very strong position to try to get this done. But I do need and will need your help. And sometimes I feel like the answers come back. Sometimes the answers are, and I don't mean this wrong, but it's worse than political answers to try to stand up and say, okay, we've got to make these tough decisions. So I hope we can work together on that. In a short period of time, Mr. Chanley, you talked about the importance of empowering veterans and recognizing every veteran's potential rather than fostering a victim's mentality. The budget proposed almost $600 million in suicide prevention outreach. How should this outreach reflect your vision of empowerment?
The messaging needs to be positive. It needs to be empowering. It needs not to lead a veteran to believe that he or she has been victimized. It needs to be properly informing that veteran that great things can be ahead, and that the VA will be there for that veteran to be able to help live the best lives possible.
Thank you. My time is just about out, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I now recognize Chairwoman Brownlee of our Health Subcommittee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Murray, I just wanted to thank you for recognizing some of the issues around SCIF and the problems surrounding that. I hope you'll take a good look at a bill that I've introduced. I've introduced it many different times, but the way CBO scores leases for the VA, unlike any other government agency, really prevents us from moving through that SCIF list, that prioritization, as you talked about, in a systematic way. And I think that, we've all talked about, when we're talking about our facilities, leasing is a better way so that we can be nimble and flexible to meet the needs as the demographics of the veteran communities across our country changes. So I could use your help in support of that bill. In the first panel, there was a lot of conversation about community care and budgeting for a significant increase in community care and seeing a significant increase in community care. And there were a lot of different reasons that people gave for why that increase is there. Perhaps, we don't have the right facilities. Perhaps we don't have the right manpower, personnel, woman power. I think one of the primary reasons, not the only reason, but I think one of the primary reasons is the fact that the rules around community care, if you can't provide primary care in 20 days, if you can't provide specialty care in 28 days, you sort of automatically roll over to the community care. So I think, I'm not suggesting changing the program necessarily. I'm still curious to hear generally what you're hearing from your memberships. Is the old adage that veterans prefer their health care within the VA still true, or is that changing?
Ms. Brownlee, I'd like to first say that we will gladly support your leasing efforts to change that. You mentioned it offers flexibility, which is incredibly important. But we have heard, as you mentioned, our members do appreciate VA care. But there is an increase in community care. It's not stating that's a good thing or necessarily a bad thing. That's just a reality right now. But we believe that in order to meet those care standards and the wait times, if there aren't enough people working at VA, if they're having difficulties filling those vacancies, then they're never going to meet the appropriate times that are required. It's that we think is the first step in making sure that veterans receive the best care possible. VA care is also cheaper than community care. Most veterans that we've surveyed say that they prefer their care at VA. So we think figuring out that staffing puzzle is probably the biggest thing we can really do.
Great. I see heads shaking, so seems to be general agreement in that statement.
Yes, Representative Brownlee, DAV have surveyed our members on several occasions, and we keep hearing the same thing. Our members prefer healthcare at the VA. They know they're getting good quality care. They use community services when they need to, but overall, the largest percentage of our membership still prefers VA healthcare.
And for PVA, community care is not an option for veterans struggling with spinal cord injuries and disorders. Part of the problem has been that for decades, due to lack of adequate infrastructure and the lack of adequate staffing, which resulted in long wait times and unnatural large increases in non-VA community care. So we have to bring that in line to reduce the staffing backlog, the infrastructure issues and problems, so that VA can remain and continue to be the number one provider of care for our nation veterans.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for that I just want to get in one more quick question, so I only have a few more seconds here left. So we all know that VA care is deemed a qualifying care under the ACA. I have a bill that says we should eliminate copays like the ACA for contraceptives for women. Do all of you support that concept? Just say yes. Head nod.
Yes.
Yes, 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 yes. Very good. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. I now recognize the chairman of our subcommittee on technology modernization.
Your target, you said?
And from Indiana for 5
Yep, in
minutes.
that Highland, whatever that's called.
Mr. Mervan, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Mervan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. With that, an electronic health record modernization. For the independent budget witnesses, in your testimony, you discussed VA's strategic review of the electronic health record modernization program. In a recent VA OIG report that indicated that the program's cost estimates were unreliable. For Mr. Murray, given these concerns, how confident you are in VA's ability to reach full deployment of the system by 2028?
I would be more confident if hurdles like the ones described in the report were removed. Any unnecessary barriers for that project completion would absolutely make the project much more successful. The current problems facing it right now are physical infrastructure ones in some areas. The closets that they're putting some of the server racks in are unventilated rooms. These are things that might not have been known at the onset of the PHRM project. These hurdles need to be taken out of the way. Otherwise, we'll never see full success if issues like that keep stopping the program's completion.
Next, the IG report's findings were specific to costs associated with infrastructure upgrades, as you mentioned. In your opinion, how important is it VA completes those infrastructure upgrades?
It's critical. The billions of dollars that are going to be invested in a necessary program, the electronic health record, needs to be taken care of. Again, if we're talking about size of rooms, if we're talking about airflow, if we're talking about power requirements, those are not insurmountable problems. Those are things that need to be taken care of. Otherwise, at the end of this whole journey, it's all going to be for nothing if minor things like that keep getting in the way.
And when it comes to the electronic health record modernization, how critically important is the success of this program to the veteran community?
It's incredibly important. One of the things that we're going through right now, as was mentioned earlier in the hearing, is the national records, right? That right now there's a backlog there. Making sure that the electronic health record is fully implemented properly is going to help out service members and veterans today and going forward in the future to make sure that there's a seamless transition to make sure that the electronic records that we're bringing VA into the 21st century, finally.
And then my final question, how can Congress, or how can we better support VA in its efforts to modernize its aging IT systems?
Fully funded IT projects, dedicated IT funding for specific projects. Recently, the digital GI Bill, as was mentioned earlier, was given a dedicated line item to complete that project fully. We need that to happen. That's a critical component for the GI Bill and education programs. IT programs like that need to be fully funded programs and specifically designated for that through completion, not put into a general IT fund that keeps getting picked out as varying needs arise.
Then if I could, just one more question, because a little bit more time allows. Within the scope of things, cybersecurity, your assessment of VA's cybersecurity issues.
I am not a cybersecurity expert, sir.
Okay, I just wanted to know, you knew budgets back and forth, so I thought I'd ask. With that, Mr. Murray, I thank you very much. And with that, I yield back my time, Chairman Takano.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan. I now recognize the chairman of our O&I Subcommittee Chairman Chris Pappas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our members of the panel here for the information and the testimony that they provided today. I want to ask about 2 issues, VA sexual harassment, as well as diversity and inclusion efforts within VA. And I want to start with you, Mr. Learman, if I can. The issue of sexual harassment is one that has taken the attention of our committee, and we really have to do all we can to address this head on. We know that in 2019, 25% of women veterans reported experiencing sexual harassment while seeking care at VA. That's compared to 5% of non-veteran women who reported experiencing sexual harassment at private sector facilities. A GAO report in 2020 showed that more than 20% of VA employees experienced sexual harassment at the workplace over a 2-year period. And it's well documented that women, people of color, LGBTQ veterans experience this at higher rates. There's also a reluctance of people to come forward and report this. Now, the president's budget calls for the creation of the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion at VA, and that would be funded to help develop and provide harassment prevention program. And in addition to that, we know that much more needs to be done on this topic. So our subcommittee and the full committee is taking this issue very seriously. And I'm wondering, Mr. Learman, if you might offer some thoughts on some of the legislation that is pending out there, the funding that's included in the budget, and what efforts you think should really motivate this committee to try to improve this situation and make sure that everyone feels safe accessing care at VA and feels safe in the workplace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pappas. DAV has been long advocating for sexual harassment awareness and training, and we believe that, as well as inclusion of diversity, if we're not paying enough attention to it within VA or VHA, that can be a deterrent to many veterans getting the health care and the benefits they actually need. DAV has been a long proponent of these types of pieces of legislation. We believe that the creation of this office can help go a long way to reduce many of our brothers and sisters who do not feel safe coming to the VA or don't feel included, or they're not being getting their health care concerns addressed because they're not coming out or being honest with their VHA providers, which is important for their long-term health care. So yes, we think all of these are a great idea, and we support the creation of this new office.
Well, thanks for those comments. And maybe I could switch gears to Mr. Loeb and talk a little bit about VA workforce and diversity inclusion efforts specifically. We know that both in the public and private sector, organizations that have diversity among managers and employees are more successful in achieving their mission. And I'm wondering if you can offer any thoughts on some of the data that we've seen lately, including AFG's 2020 survey that finds that more than 3/4 or 78% of VA employees said that racism is a problem at the VA. I think we can talk about this issue in a number of different dimensions, including the lack of inclusive and equitable hiring practices, widespread biases that exist against women and minorities. But I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about diversity and inclusion, some of the efforts we've seen of late from VA and what more needs to be done there.
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Pappas. AFG fully supports the president's budget proposal, specifically the creation of the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion. As you mentioned, AFG did its own study on racial disparities and systemic racism at the VA. We discovered that in 2019, only 2.5% of African-American applicants for management positions were actually selected at the VA, which, given the high participation of people of color in the VA workforce, just struck us as being out of sorts, to put it mildly. As a result, we very, very much support this office, and we think it could do a fair amount to bring some greater level of understanding and sensitivity to the problems of both systemic racism, sexism, and other types of various types of discrimination that exist at the VA.
Well, we thank you for your outspokenness on this, for the data that you've helped provide through AFGE. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. I do see that Chairwoman Marcy Kapters is still on the call. She's still, but I want to give her a chance to maybe turn on her camera and ask questions. But if not, it does not appear that I have any more members in the question. Oh, there she is. Chairwoman Kapter of our Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee. I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't have questions. I just wanted to say to each of the gentlemen who has testified today, thank you so very much for your voices. Thank you for those who you represent. I can tell you from my years of service in the Congress, were it not for you, we would not be able to improve services to our veterans. And I know how important you are, as do all of the members of this committee. So I just wanted to say thank you very, very much. And onward, keep doing your good work. It truly matters. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kapter. Thank you all members who participated today. I want to thank all the members, of our witnesses on the second panel. I will now dismiss our witnesses. I now recognize Mr. Boss for any closing comments he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just appreciate all the witnesses that came forward. Hopefully we will be working together on all of these issues. And thank you for your input. And as always, enjoy all of the information that we get from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I'd like to close with a few final points. Let me just say I appreciated the civility and the spirit of comity that was displayed by members of both sides of the aisle, despite the different points of view and different political philosophies. The engagement was respectful and I think befitting of the bipartisan history and culture of this committee. It's very encouraging to receive a VA budget that gives much needed attention to the areas of the department that needs more resources and reforms. However, I need to say that members from both sides of the aisle pointed to issues and problems that affect veterans across the nation, and these need to be addressed. One issue that was raised many times is the need for more transparency with the budget process. The committee passed bipartisan legislation on the House floor to strengthen VA budget oversight. This bill is important, and we're working with our Senate counterparts to make sure it becomes law. However, the committee need not wait for this bill to become law. And I was pleased to hear that Secretary McDonough stated that he was not intending for that bill to become law, to be more forthcoming with more specificity and detail on the intentions of the department. I plan on working with the Secretary and all of our committee members to gain a deeper understanding of the budget during the weeks ahead and ensure accountability. This is the role of Congress, whether it is in the hands of one party or the other. It is our institutional role, is our constitutional duty. Again, I'd like to thank all our witnesses for their contributions to today's discussion. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. Again, thank you all for appearing before us today. Thank you for what you do and your advocacy on behalf of our nation's veterans. And I now declare this hearing to be adjourned.